Hey, Steven.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Awesome.
You're kind of not moving around much. You're a little stiff, but you look good.
We can hear you guys. Can you hear us?
Can hear you just fine, JP.
All right, great. We're going to get started now.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of March 7th, 2022 of the Measure U Oversight Committee to order. John Paul, do we need roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Committee Member Daron.
Here.
Committee Member Clark. Here. Committee Member Tamez.
Here.
Committee Member Chenault.
Here.
Vice Chair is absent. Chairwoman Cosmo.
Here.
All members are present with the exception of Vice Chair.
Okay, moving to number 3, Pledge of Allegiance. Tammy, would you like to lead us, please?
You stand. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, number 4, communication from the public. Anyone who wishes to address the Oversight Committee regarding items listed on the agenda and not on the agenda may do so at this time. Public comments are temporarily limited to 2 minutes. Please state your name when the chairperson calls for a public comment. When you are recognized, you may proceed with your comment. The Oversight Committee is prohibited from taking action or discussing any item not appearing on the agenda. A member of the Oversight Committee itself may take action to direct staff to place a matter of business on a future agenda. And John Paul, do we have, I have Pat's, do we have any e-comments or Zoom telephone comments?
There's no registered public comments, but if you'll allow me just one moment to call out for public comment on the Zoom. If there's anyone that would like to speak, I can see that there's one participant. Now is the time to raise your hand. I can unmute you and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If there's anyone out there on the Zoom call, now is the time to speak. We'll give you just a moment. Seeing none, Chair, there's no one present for public comment.
Okay, I'd like to, Pat Gregory.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think the big question before this committee is it appropriate to use Measure U funds contrary to what was promised to the voters? Not what the general, or not what the law says, which is at the general fund, but can you make and can you go across and against what the voters voted for? Resolution 4703 states, the City Council shall dedicate 100% of the tax proceeds to enhancing public safety services and increasing funding for such services. Ordinance 1918, it says that the Citizens Committee is established to review and advise upon the city's expenditures and not just answer questions. It's your job to review and advise. And the committee is supposed to annually review and report on what happens on the proceeds and present that report to the city council. I haven't seen that, and hopefully it's forthcoming, but it's a requirement of this committee. Ordinance 1918 says that the proceeds from Measure U shall be subject to the same independent annual audit requirement and will be presented annually to the Citizens Oversight Committee. This wasn't done the first 2 years of Measure U. It's being done today, and the problem I have is that in the audit, it says staff proposed another level of review. Well, that's not true. What happened is that citizens demanded that the audit be presented to Measure U, to the Measure U committee. It was the citizens complaining, and for 2 years, remember, the city did not comply with that requirement. What you're going to see today is an AUP analysis. I hope you read the letter that is basically a disclaimer from the auditors. It says, procedures performed may not address all items, may not meet the needs of the users, and they weren't engaged to provide an opinion. So that AUP that the last committee approved, instead of a separate independent audit, is not, to me, doesn't say a whole lot. The city also says that because of sound fiscal policies, the city of Hemet finished the year with stronger than expected revenues. I don't think the city should pat itself on the back for siphoning funds from Measure U. If you have the time to look at the budget and read the numbers, you'll see Hemet is no better off financially than it was 5 years ago, but they're using Measure U. And what are they using Measure U for? General fund expenses to pay for city police officers. I think the police should get everything, the fire department should get everything, and they're not. Here's one issue. According to the audit again, general government employees were increased by 4 from the year 2017 to 2021. Number of police officers in 2017, 75. Number of police officers in 21, 71. So is Measure U subsidizing government employees instead of adding new police like we had been promised? If the city is not going to comply with Measure U, then they need to be upfront about it and quit sneaking all the numbers under all these accounting procedures that don't really say anything. So my concern is that Measure U is not being used for what's intended. And I think it's time that this committee stand up, review and advise just like you're required to, but tell the city that it can't ignore the resolutions and ordinances that promise these funds to both the police and the fire. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. John, I'm freezing in here, sorry.
Me too.
Feels great.
Should I keep going or?
I'm messaging.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, to get.
Okay, we don't have presentations today, so we'll move to number 6, consent calendar. All consent calendar items will be acted upon by a single action of the Measure U Oversight Committee unless otherwise requested by an individual committee member for separate consideration. Would any member like to pull anything off of 6A? Yes. Okay, John Paul, we need a motion, right? Yes, do you have a motion to approve the minutes of the June 15th, 2021 Measure U Committee and also the February 28th, 2022 Measure U Committee meeting?
Motion. Second.
Motion by committee member Tamez, committee member, second by committee member Daron,
Yes.
committee member Clark.
Yes.
Committee member Tamez,
Yes.
committee member Chenault,
Yes.
Chairwoman Cosmo.
Yes,
That motion passes 5-0.
thank you. Okay, 7A, Measure U, our fiscal year 2021 Measure U expenditure review. Is that Lorena or?
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. Chair, good to see everybody, members of the Oversight Committee. I would like to start off with a little bit of history because I think it's really relevant based on a comment that was made by a public speaker. And I'd like to encourage everybody to look at this information. And I'll share my screen here just so that you know where it's coming from. But this is actually the June 15, 2021 Oversight Committee agenda backup. I've been known for saying the same thing, not only to the Oversight Committee, but also to the council. And so I want to provide this to the committee so that everybody gets an understanding of the true facts of what the city has actually been through. I won't provide the context of the background related to Ordinance 1908, but I would like to spend some time on the budget history deficit spending item because I think it's really relevant to this committee to help set the stage and maybe clear up some of the questions that were brought up a little bit ago. So this, I'm just going to read it verbatim. The city of Hemet's financial challenges have been well noted, but the city has taken aggressive steps in moving away from the past practice. In August of 2016, the state auditor released a report that concluded the following. Hemet is a high-risk city due to its financial and organizational risks. Specifically, Hemet's budget deficit has persisted for many years, and our projection indicates that it will continue through at least fiscal year 1920, raising concerns about the city's ability to fund its services. Although the city developed a 5-year plan to address its deficit, inaccurate information and overly optimistic assumptions distort the validity of the city's projection. In addition, we identified inefficiencies in the city's management. So this is from August of 2016. So if we think back to August 2016, there was also some discussions about Measure U and what Measure U meant for the community of Hemet. So I'll take the next step. On June 23rd, 2015, the mayor and the city council of the city of Hemet adopted its fiscal year 15-16 budget. That year's budget was adopted with a $5 million deficit, which utilized fund balance above the 20% emergency reserve to balance the budget. So the use of reserves to cover ongoing operational expenses put off the difficult decision to balance the budget without the use of reserves, meaning how do you balance your budget? You reduce your expenditures. But that's a difficult choice to make when you've got such critical items with over 70% being public safety. It's a very difficult thing to do. The following year, the city's comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year 16-17, which was independently audited by outside auditors, stated the following on page 2 of the auditor's report. The general fund has suffered significant reductions in fund balance by $2.3 million from operations. These conditions raise concerns about the financial condition of the city's governmental activities in the general fund and impact on future operations of the city. So based on the statements made by the state auditor, as well as the statements made by the city's independent auditor, there was clearly a well-documented financial problem at the city of Hemet. In 2016, the Hemet voters were asked to authorize a 1% additional sales tax measure to add and enhance levels of public safety services. While this was a noble concept, an effort to enhance its public safety levels, this tax was clearly conveyed as one that would provide additional and enhanced public safety programs. Given the statements by the state auditor and the city's independent auditor, its structural deficit meant one clear thing. The city of Hemet could not afford the level of services it provided in 2016. That's why it needed to use its fund balance to continue operations to fund those. So the city promoted the actions that it would take to add new and enhanced resources, yet the city was unable to provide for the status quo in 2015 and 2016 without the use of reserves. So this key issue, which was clearly conveyed in the budget documents and the annual audits, was not a part of the public discussion. So this is the dilemma that the council has been grappling with over the last few years, and the Oversight Committee has as well. So this dilemma has manifested itself in a complex situation. The promising of additional public safety levels while ignoring the fact that the city could not afford the levels of service it provided in 2016. So I'm not Nostradamus, but the key question that was identified was in this sentence here. Moving forward, the committee should recognize that this problem will lead to questions from the public about expectations versus reality. So the expectations of what was promised to the community in 2015, 2016, and the reality that the city has had to grapple with related to its fiscal condition. And that causes, some challenges with respect to the city's financial condition. So I say all that to lay the foundation of what some of the progress that we've made here today. I'm happy to report, although not a part of this discussion, that the city was on a high-risk city listed by the state auditor. Just in October of 2021, the state auditor removed the city from the list of being a high-risk city for financial practices. So great progress that's gone on over the last few years, and I'd like to commend the management team as well as the council for prioritizing fiscal sustainability for the city of Hemet. So with that being said, I think that's a good foundation to kick off from, and I'm hoping that I speak a lot less during this discussion, really allow our chiefs, our independent auditors, as well as Lorena to take the lead on most of the conversations we're having today. So I'd like to start off by sharing just a quick thing that we'll be doing as a new thing this year. Based on the information that's included in the staff report, as well as input from the Oversight Committee over the last couple of years, we've summarized the highlights of the Measure U funded programs. And so we're prepared to, after the committee has had a chance to review and provide input on its letter to the council, to put all of the highlights that both chiefs have provided in terms of what Measure U is actually being spent on. And so we've included, obviously, acknowledgement of the Oversight Committee member that comes together to review these items. We've also provided an executive summary of what Measure U is all about. And then we get into the actual highlights of what the Oversight Committee and what the police and the fire departments have done with Measure U funding, because that is a really important thing that needs to get out to the community. So you'll note that the items that were included here are the same things that mirror the staff report. So it's our attempt to try and educate and inform the public about the reality of what Measure U is being spent on. And you'll see that the overwhelming majority of it is for critical needs in the police and fire departments. You'll see the number of personnel that are being funded from Measure U, so you get an idea of what those items are, as well as some graphics with representing each department. This has come straight from both chiefs. The highlights are included from both chiefs. And so they'll have a chance to talk about these specific items during their presentation. In addition to that, we've included a placeholder for the Oversight Committee to include, and it's not in this draft, but based on the letter that's provided by the Oversight Committee, which has been provided to the council over the last few years, we will include a placeholder for that letter to be embedded within this Measure U year in review. So that's our attempt to educate the public on what's going on here, because we do find that sometimes there's some misinformation that's out there, or inaccurate reporting on what goes on. So our attempt is to try and clear the air when it comes to some of those items. So with that being said, I'd like to kick off the presentation. And give me 1 second, let me share my screen. So the purpose of today's conversation, obviously the strategic plan integration, which like I said, I repeat some of the same things to try and just circle back on everything and make sure that we're all covered. Obviously the strategic plan integration with respect to this discussion has to do with obviously quality of life, increased public safety, visibility and response, partnership and collaboration, develop concepts and programs that enhance quality of life services. And then finally, community engagement, deliver messaging to the community that connects, is consistent, and is relevant. So the item for discussion today, 7A, 7B, and 7C, review fiscal year 2020, 2021 Measure U expenditures. And we're asking the committee to receive a presentation regarding the fiscal year 2020, 2021 Measure U expenditures. So as we started last week, I'd like to start off with the questions that we will be asking the Measure U Oversight Committee, just so that the committee has a foundation of what we'll be talking about today and the expectation from staff about what we are expecting from the Oversight Committee. So we've got 4 questions that we'd like the committee to discuss as we move forward. The first one is, are the audited expenditures of police and fire in line with resolutions 4703, 4731, and ordinance 1918, and that's what the chiefs will be talking about in their presentation. Does the committee wish to provide commentary on recommending the transfer of general funds back to the Measure U fund for funds unspent by PD in the amount of $320,000? And I'll let Lorena discuss that once it comes up. The third question, does the committee wish to provide commentary on recommending a transfer from Measure U funds to the general fund for fire department expenses in excess of Measure U budgeted items in the amount of $188,000? So what this means is that the Measure U had originally planned to spend X amount of dollars. There was an overage that the general fund covered. Does the committee wish to provide any commentary to the council about reimbursing the general fund from Measure U for that expense? It's similar to question number 2, it's just in reverse. And the fourth question, does the committee authorize the chair and vice chair to sign a letter affirming the findings from question 1 and 2 on behalf of the Measure U Oversight Committee to the Hemet City Council? By way of background, a Citizens Oversight Committee is hereby established to independently review and advise upon the city's expenditure of proceeds generated by the transactions and use tax. The committee shall meet at least twice each calendar year and more frequently, if necessary, to discharge the responsibilities of the committee. The Citizens Oversight Committee shall annually review and report on 1, the city's proposed and actual expenditure of proceeds generated by the transaction and use tax, and 2, the independent annual audit required under this article. And I would like to note that we did have a member of the public speak on this. And prior to 2019, it appears that the audit was not presented to the Oversight Committee. I know that when I came on board, it was one of the things that I brought forward to the committee. So I know that Chair Cosma, as well as committee member Clark, can recall that those audits, once that was realized, we brought those forward to the committee to make sure that we were in compliance with this requirement. Now, it should be noted, I will pose the question to the auditors about why an AUP is required or why we're doing an AUP versus a separate audit on Measure U itself. And I know that question came up last year, and so it will be a bit of a repetition for the existing committee, for the veteran committee members, but I think there's value in educating the new committee members on why the AUP is there. And that is something that we did recommend because that was a question that came up. And so we, the finance team and I talked about how we could do that. And so that's what came about with respect to providing the AUP. So the committee has not only the annual audit, the committee has an AUP. So you've got 2 separate reports that summarize very similar information, the same information from 2 different independent auditors. So you've got 2 different groups that are reviewing that are independent of the city that are looking at these items. So for resolutions 4703 and 4731, the city council shall, as part of the city's normal budget process, annually prepare and adopt an expenditure plan for enhancing public safety services within the city, including application of the tax proceeds. The expenditure plan shall be submitted to the Citizens Oversight Committee required by Measure U for their review and comment prior to the city council's consideration and adoption of the expenditure plan. So the expenditure plan shall be consistent with the requirements of this resolution, including but not limited to the following. And I won't get into reading this verbatim, but I should note that I know that Chair Cosma, as well as committee member Clark, are familiar that before the budget gets presented to the council, we come to this committee, talk about the proposed expenditures for police and fire. They provide the explanation to the committee, and then we receive feedback from the committee, which we then document in a formal letter that gets received and filed by the city council. So that's a process that the committee should expect. Proposed expenditures are aligned to be brought forward to the committee before they're brought forward to the council, so that the committee provides commentary on proposed expenditures regarding Measure U. This same concept is similar to what we did last week with the proposed MOU expenses, which we brought to the committee to discuss, which we have a receive and file item on the agenda based on the direction and the comments provided by the committee, which will be received and filed by the council tomorrow. You will also note that the MOUs will be brought forward to the council tomorrow for approval. So it's very, very important that from the city manager's office, the finance department, police and fire, that those proposed expenditures are brought forward to the committee before they're brought forward to the council. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, and that should be the expectation from the committee of staff. So now I'd like to hopefully turn it over to both chiefs to talk about the actual expenses from the police department. You know, obviously, if there's any questions that the committee has, I'm sure both chiefs are able to provide commentary on that. So the plan for the rest of this conversation, both chiefs will provide some commentary. We've got Lorena that's going to talk about the financial component, the audit, as well as the AUP. We also have the auditors that conducted the AUP on the Zoom call, so that questions related to the AUP can be directly routed to the auditors that did the AUP. So with that being said, Chief Poos, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Good evening, Measure U Chair and committee members. Right off the staff report that we have the financials regarding our expenditures and our budget. As you know, it's self-explanatory on what was spent on personnel, operating supplies, services, major machinery, with a couple asterisks at the bottom that kind of clarifies some balance transfers. Those are projects that we had in place that are moving forward. So those were balances that were carried over from one fiscal year to another. Next slide. And if you can keep in mind, prior to going any further, this was a critical year for, I think, for all of us, because just prior to this budget year, we were experiencing the pandemic. So we put a lot of brakes on what we were doing, and rightfully so, because I didn't know what to expect with what was going to happen financially. The worst thing ever is for myself and the fire chief to lay personnel off, and that was our biggest fear. So this began right prior to the new starting the new budget. So we did a lot of things just to be understanding of what we may face that following year, this fiscal year that we're discussing, fiscal year 2021. We didn't start any hiring till mid-August, no, November, for sworn personnel and support staff. We base that on each position, and that's why I want to highlight these, because some of these positions are very critical. Some of these positions that we had to hire during that time are occupied by one person that does that specific job. So on police officers during that fiscal year, we had 4 vacant positions that we began the hiring process in November. And during that fiscal year, we did hire 4 police officers to fill those positions. Public safety dispatch, obviously that's a critical area in our department for all of public safety, the police department and the fire department. During that fiscal year, we experienced 1 service retirement and 4 resignations. And we were able during that time we wanted to fill all those positions, but we were able to fill 1 part-time public safety dispatcher and 1 full-time public safety dispatcher position that was hired. So part-time and a full-time. We continued the recruitment, and obviously we're back to where we almost back to where we were with the 4 resignations and retirement. Public safety office specialist, that wasn't a critical area to replace at that time, so we did not fill that position. Administrative assistant, that we experienced a vacancy there. That was due to a resignation, and that vacancy was not filled. Management assistant, that position is held by 1 person, and we had experienced a retirement, which we filled that position. Crime scene technician, we only have 1 crime scene technician, so that position was unfilled due to resignation. We filled it right after that vacancy, and the same with property and evidence technician. So just to recap, we had for sworn personnel, we had 3 resignations, 1 retirement, and we hired 4 officers. For our support staff, we had 8 resignations, 1 retirement. We were able to hire 4 and also hired one part-time personnel, and that was in our dispatch area. And afterward, I'll discuss some of the good work that was done with human resource and police department personnel regarding hiring and where we're at today. But I want to stick to fiscal year 2021. Next slide, please. These are highlights for our equipment that we purchased during this fiscal year. This was obvious, the CAD upgrade and the radio microwave update. Those were approved the prior fiscal year, but all the work and the training was conducted in fiscal year 2021. So that took that whole fiscal year for all that implementation, all those upgrades and the replacement of those two projects. And I wanted to highlight that because that was a lot of work that was completed by our staff in both departments.
Chief, maybe you can talk about some of the issues that happened with the radio system, because I remember a couple years ago, we were having drop communication between fire personnel. They couldn't communicate with one another. I believe we even had to transition to our officers taking calls and using notepads or note cards to report or to respond to that. So maybe you can talk about why that was such a critical item.
Yeah, well, I've been here for 25 years and that system was in place longer than I was. So that's first of all. I think the only thing that we upgraded during that time frame was the large antenna that you see hovering over the police department. So there's been years and from a personal standpoint and working for on many task forces, working with other agencies, it has always been difficult to communicate. And that was our biggest problem. We're just this island sitting here between the county or surrounded by county and other departments, other agencies, always had an issue to communicate. That was one of our most critical issues that we dealt with, because either something's happening here or with our neighboring city, like the sheriff's department, we're not able to communicate. We're standing right next to the individual officer. That makes it so stressful just for our people out there trying to help resolve a situation that they're dealing with at hand, and also for us. Having responding units from outside our agency, and we can't even communicate with them. It just makes it really difficult. The recent years, we experienced a lot of drop calls, as the city manager mentioned. No communication between our two departments, no communication from car to car. When I say car to car, from one officer to another officer, I mean, it was just a dying system that we needed definitely to replace. To include, a new law came out last year regarding encryption due to information that's provided over the radio that's confidential. So that was another step, but we were in the process of replacing the system, which, since we met that requirement, which was part of the statute, you either had to be in the process of replacing, had a plan in place, which we did, because it was a dying system and we went to encryption. So a lot of things fell into place. Fortunately, we were already moving forward, and we were fortunate that the county had a system in place that now we can communicate with everybody in the county. As of right now, there's only one other, the Desert Agencies, who's on the ERICA system, who's moving over to PSEC. So everybody in the county of Riverside will be able to communicate over the radio. So that's a big step forward. I think we were the 4th city to jump on the PSEC radio, and we've been fortunate to get that done this last fiscal year. So there was many different issues with the radio system, but with this replacement, it's probably one of the best technology replacements we've had here for the city, that with next to no issues as of right now. So it's been great. Traffic motorcycles, I'm a big proponent. I want traffic out there all the time. That's one thing that I think one of the big issues that people, our community, really is worried about because of the speeders and the heavy traffic that we have on our main thoroughfares, which is Florida Avenue, Stetson, Sanderson. So the goal for that was to increase our traffic bureau, which we are doing right now, to 7 days a week. I want them out there 7 days a week. There's traffic on the weekends. We should be working that specific traffic assignment. Now we have our officers out there, but we're taking away from what they're trying to do. And when we could focus our efforts with just the traffic bureau 7 days a week. So that's one of the things that we were able to push through and get started. And we're not there yet, but we're moving forward. So we should be there by midsummer, the 7 days a week traffic. Next slide. These are some specialty services that I wanted to highlight. I mentioned Rock's last Monday, and I'll talk about his Restoring Our Community strategy. They deal with the nuisance, homelessness, a lot of the criminal activity or non-criminal activity. They're pretty much our target team when dealing with those issues within the city. That's another specialty project that we've expanded this last budget or the prior fiscal year. And our goal is to make that 7 days a week. Their efforts stop with their days off, which I think needs to continue, because by the time they get back, everything's piled up again and we're starting from scratch. It's not continuous, which this is something their efforts need to be maintained daily. And so we're pushing forward on making Rock 7 days a week. Another highlight is our PISMO. That's our Public Information Social Media Officer. To me, that's a very important position, especially as we move forward to highlight our Measure U programs. This position is important to manage all our departments' websites, social media websites, our recruitment, and those types of platforms. We were able to fill that position this past year, so I'm excited with that. It's puts out the positive work that we do with Measure U. And then our other, as I mentioned, our traffic bureau, that's one thing we're moving to 7 days a week, and we purchased equipment to move forward with that. I believe that's all we have. Next slide. Yeah. So any questions on that? I want to highlight some things. I know we're talking about fiscal year 2021, but as we got that year moving forward, we were able to look at revenues coming in, and we were able to hire those positions that are necessary. We continued that process, and so you're aware, because it's that issue that we dealt with hiring, getting personnel to apply for these types of positions as sworn police officers. But we did pretty good this upcoming year. And so just to give you an understanding, we did have 4 resignations and 1 retirement for sworn personnel. We were able to hire 2 officers that we have in training. We hired 3 entry level that begin the academy at the end of March. So at the end of this month, we'll have 3 officers in the academy for future staffing. Support staff, we have 4 support staff hired during this past fiscal year. We had a CSO that begins in April, so that's an addition to include a dispatcher who started today. That's a step in the right direction. And so you're aware that we have this hiring, when we do a hiring process and we do our backgrounds, it is time consuming. It takes a long time, and we're looking at a 4 to 6 month turnover. We currently have 2 LAPD officers that are completing the last part of the background. We now will have a chief's interview with them within the next 2-3 weeks. We have 1 San Diego PD officer as well that I'll be interviewing in 2 weeks. 1 San Diego Sheriff's Office officer that's that's applying with us and continue the background. They have a couple more steps, but I'll be within the next month, I should have a chief's interview with that subject, as well as a San Bernardino PD officer. We have 1 academy grad in the process. We have 4 entry level in background, and we have 2 more LAPD officers in background. So just giving you an idea, it takes a while to get that ball rolling, but as we started in last November, I think you can see the results as they come closer and closer. So we're moving in the right direction. I'm excited about that. I know that's always a concern. Where are we? We're at 72 sworn as of today. And as you see, as I mentioned, these personnel, I have 1 retirement at the end of this fiscal year, but we're moving forward. We're planning for those as well.
Chief, I'm going to brag about you a little bit just because I think it's necessary, and I don't think you're going to do it for yourself. So I'll do it for you. Some of the things when the committee talks about what the initial idea of what Measure U was slated to be back in 2015 or 2016, I don't think anybody predicted the downfall of the radio system and the issues that we had there. So the ability for Chief Poos to obviously recognize that and begin the work to recommend that, highly commendable. The other items related to the CSOs, transitioning and freeing up our sworn personnel to allow CSOs to do that work is something that the chief continues to do. So when we think about how can we maximize the use of sworn personnel, free up our sworn personnel, and utilize non-sworn personnel to do the work that maybe at one point was done by sworn personnel, we know that we've got challenges with hiring, just like every other agency does. Leadership is all about recommending and making changes, good management, when you've got those obstacles in your way. So I want to commend Chief for taking the lead and bringing those items forward and not get stuck in the rut of saying, oh, well, we said we were going to hire 20 sworn personnel. We know we've got challenges. We know that those things come up, but it's all about making good recommendations on how you solve or alleviate some of those issues. And the last thing I want to bring up, and Chief, I think is really important that you talk about this, is the flock system. I don't think that the flock system was ever envisioned in 2015 or 2016, but can you talk about what that's done to the police department and what we've been able to accomplish with the flock system so that the committee gets an understanding of what we're doing to invest some of these Measure U dollars in?
Yeah, I have to hand it to my predecessors as well, because we've always been innovative when it comes to technology in Riverside County. And I truly believe that we were the first city to implement and fully implement the body worn camera system, the first city in Riverside. Obviously, that's a big step forward, especially nowadays. And to include Flock. Flock is an automatic license plate reader system. The system's incredible. The information goes to our officers' tablets as well as their phones immediately. The Flock system is to reduce, or not to reduce crime, but not only that, to solve crimes. And we're able to do a lot of great things with the Flock. So we were the first city to implement that. And I don't want to tell you where these cameras are. I'm sure people figure them out because they see them out on the street, but we're actually moving forward with collaboration with all the county as well. So there's going to, if there's a crime that's committed, keep in mind, we'll be able to track that. As long as we have a license plate, we'll be able to track that vehicle here. Not only here, all the cities in Riverside County has moved forward to purchase Flock. So there's I think over 1,000 cameras that are going to be deployed throughout Riverside County with all the different agencies. And we could talk to each other and we could collaborate with certain crimes. But we were able to solve homicides that came through our city from Los Angeles, kidnapping cases, obviously murders, robberies, things like that. A lot of these high profile crimes that have been dealt with, even like Beverly Hills case, if they drove through Riverside and we were able to grab that license plate, that was very helpful for them to solve that crime, which that was very highlighted in the news a few weeks ago, which we were instrumental in helping them with that evidence. So it's a great project, great technology, and I think we've always done really well with technology here as a city. So those are great highlights. I like to talk about it, but that's always, I always say to my predecessors prior to me, this is something that we moved forward because it's beneficial to solving crime and to our community.
So I don't know if you all caught that, but the city of Hemet implemented the Flock system, and then shortly thereafter, every single other agency in Riverside County jumped on board. So it was Chief Poos that brought that over and implemented that. So again, made possible utilizing some Measure U funding. So without that, I don't know how many officers it would have taken to get that type of eyes on the streets, because it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's once you have this type of technology up, you're able to use that to solve crimes a lot faster. We have easier access the way technology is now, but also to include increasing that technology, collaborating with our partners outside in the county. So right now with the county, we're working on hitting certain points and sharing the cost of that. So a lot of these cameras that we have going up, they're actually at a point where it's going to benefit the county. The county's actually implementing putting those cameras in that area, and we're covering other areas where we share that information. So it's I think the collaboration and the technology itself, it's going to make the valley a lot safer, at least reduce crime and be able to solve crime.
May I ask, how many CSOs do you have?
Right now, we have 5 CSOs that are, that those positions are filled, and I have 4 vacancies.
And how many did you have in 2016?
I believe we had 6.
With the question on the plots,
Go ahead.
we have history of doing this to each other. So this information out of it can be used future or back, so you can, the camera is working on an intersection and you get a report from somewhere else. And you can go into that system to see if that vehicle
It'll
has
notify,
gone.
it'll notify us. For example, your question is, I understand what you're asking.
2
so we
weeks
go
later,
back,
can you go back?
we can go back.
Mhm.
We have to run the plate, but if a car is wanted
Mhm.
for a murder investigation, it'll automatically hit our system within seconds. So they get notifications on their phone. I had to turn mine off because I'd get some at 2 in the morning all the time. But we automatically get notified in dispatch as well in their car MDCs,
Mhm.
these tablets that they have in the car, so automatically. So it'll give a direction of the vehicle and a picture of the vehicle from that camera.
Now, is it automatically running for stolens?
Yes, it's what we set it at.
Okay.
And the importance, this is a service agreement that we pay for because of all the laws and privacy laws. So this is a 30-day rotation that we get this information. It just falls off the books after 30 days.
Mhm.
And that's why there's not too much of concern. And it's not, a lot of, we don't have time to look at all the cameras going through this. Now, obviously it has to be in a public thoroughfare access. It can't be facing any private area. But the benefits of this is we are seeing some community groups like Seven Hills that are interested in purchasing the private side of this, which they allow us to have access. Now, we don't get access unless they allow it, but the reason is to purchase that to give us that access because we get that information instantly within seconds of any cars going through there. But we can go back to see what occurred because some of the crimes that are committed, you would put a vehicle license plate on that in the system, but we know what the plate is. We could run that plate
Mhm.
and be able to obtain that information.
Yes. Some of the really higher end ones are also connected to the vehicle. So if you're behind, if you're in a patrol car behind a vehicle, it automatically reads. Is that part of the current?
That's different from flock, but we do have that solution for commercial tow trucks. They'll have that, as well as we have a couple cars that have that type of technology that we're able to run that.
But officers are still having to ask dispatch to run yeah, I was gonna try and stay away from that.
Yeah.
2029
Yeah,
registration stolen. They still have to ask for that. It's not something automatic yet.
No, that's not automatic
Okay.
unless the car is equipped with that
Yeah.
type of system, and those are the ones that have the cameras around the cars. But the cost is the issue for any department. So now that we go to cloud-based storage, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
This is a service, so we have unlimited access. We pay the service. It's their cameras. We just get the use of it. So to make it affordable for us and the rest of the cities in the county, that's what makes this certain flock beneficial. And I don't want to name the different technologies that are out there, but the cost to do an intersection, that type of technology is tenfold the cost of what we currently pay for one camera.
Is this separate from the enforcement type cameras for running a red light and those cameras? Is it separate or is it?
Yeah, it's separate, and I don't think there's a city in Riverside County that now has those camera enforcement. Yeah, they've, in fact, I don't know of any cities in Southern California right now that, the issues, it's been very expensive. And plus the different laws that came out and try to verify. I think the cost wasn't cost effective.
I-
So,
I
God
have a
forbid you get
relative
caught
that-
in that.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
relative that's
Intersection.
retired, and that's what his volunteer job is up in the Bay Area.
okay, yeah, I don't know
And
of
it's
any.
boring.
Yeah, I remember when Riverside had them all over the place, and then, we drive to the academy and stuff, and we see these flashes all the time. But yeah, no, it just wasn't cost effective. So I don't know. I definitely know cities in Riverside County, and I don't know anything about Orange County or San Diego if they carry that still, that type of technology.
But I will tell you, right after you started putting those cameras up, you guys were tagging stolen cars left and right. I mean, every day it was coming out that people were getting their cars back and that was right after you put those cameras installed. So it does work as far as stolen cars because we have a problem with that, obviously, in this city. And now they're stealing them in broad daylight. I just read, some guy's truck just got stolen, the other day, broad daylight, right out in front of his house. But because of that program and that system, right when it got set up, it was just flagging. I mean, you guys are hitting them all the time, pulling people over for stolen cars. So I think it's an awesome, that's something where I'd like to see money be spent. The thing of, and I'm just gonna go here because this is such a lot of time. I personally don't need to be sold on why you need Measure You money or why you're asking for Measure You money or what you're using Measure You money for, because that's what it's made to be for. Why I feel that I'm here and why I'm on this committee is to make sure that it is being spent for what it's put into place for. So I think it's great that you guys are here and you have to tell us everything that it's being used for, but I don't need to be sold on it. I would write you a check every week. I mean, like, sure, you need that? No problem. Here you go. Here's a check. I'll get it. So, but I think what my concern is, and I hope everybody else on the board's concern is it being used for the right purpose? And when it has to go with fire and police, I'm not questioning, is it being used for the right purpose? I'm not questioning that. And I don't need to be sold on it of what you're using it for, because like I said, I'd write you a check. What my concern is that, last week, Chris, you brought up a point that I didn't even know about. When Measure U was implemented, I already knew, because I've been going to meetings, city council meetings before you got on board, but so I already knew a lot of what you were talking about in 2015. But I was unaware that when Measure U was voted in and came in, that the city was not in a position to implement the use of it because we didn't have the money. And that's what I was understanding. What you were saying is that you couldn't implement it until we became flush with the city, and then we were able to use that. The concern, and everybody keeps bringing up, and what all residents keep bringing up is that we use that to balance the budget. That was a one-time, we're hoping that was just a one-time that we needed to balance that and make us flush, so we could then start out on an even field and start out without being under the umbrella of going bankrupt. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew that Hemet was going to go bankrupt. Nobody wanted to come here. I'm sure that was really hard to get fire and police, to even apply here, because Hemet was under that umbrella. Well, if that town's going to go bankrupt, why do I want to go to work there? I don't want to go to work there. So we had to become flush, and we had to do that. What I see is now is that you're talking about, and your usage up there was that, okay, so Measure U never had its own bank account. It's put in with the general fund, correct?
So for accounting purposes, and I think it's a really good accounting question, so I'm not going to attempt to be one. But we do have a way to track them separately. Maybe Lorena can answer that question.
We do have a way of tracking them separate.
Right.
Up until the end of 2021, what we were doing was it was embedded within. So our general fund is on our books broken up into 3 funds. Fund 100 for administrative type departments such as finance, human resources, city manager's office, and so on. Fund 110 is for public services. That means public safety, fire, police, and library. And Fund 120 is all of our community development services, building, engineering, planning, and so on. Because police and fire are in Fund 110, we were told by legal at the time that it should remain in Fund 110 because it is a general tax. Even though there's a resolution in place for accounting standards, it remains a general tax. And so we had to keep it there. So what I did at the time, because I was the accounting manager, is I created a new revenue account for Measure U. And then on the expenditure side, created what was called the new department. So we had what we always knew as our police department, which was department number 3100, and police Measure U was 3101. On the fire side, 3200, fire Measure U became 3240. And so what that did was it made it complicated because we had to manually track a lot of things on a spreadsheet. And so a lot of things have changed. We have new auditors, we have a new attorney. I'm in a different role. And so we've revisited that. And we've all agreed that we can create a 4th fund, Fund 15, which is now exclusively to track Measure U, so that we're not having to do all of the stuff that we have to do on a spreadsheet. And it's just being tracked in Fund 115. However, for financial reporting purposes, you won't see it as a standalone fund because that would mean that we're treating it as a special revenue and it's not. And so it's rolled up into the general fund. So you'll never see, community development separate from public services, separate from administration. They're all one.
Right. Well, no, just because it's saying that you're gonna put money back into the Measure U fund. And so that was I wasn't understanding, how can
Sure.
you put it back into it if it's already there?
Sure.
Because we have to
yeah,
track it separate.
But that's what I'm
By
saying. So
resolution, we
that's
have to
why,
track it separate.
right, because my understanding was it was all in the general fund. And then I'm sure there is a way that you guys track it and keep it as separate. But if it's all basically considered being in the general fund, then that was my question of how can you then put it back into the general fund when it's already there.
And we'll talk a little bit more when we get into the financial reports and the ADP.
Okay.
That was done.
And I'd like to just comment, those are really good questions that Committee Member Darwin mentioned. And the fund balance for the Measure U fund, how much is currently in fund balance for Measure U?
16,194,000.
So about, let's just for the sake of this point that I'll make, about $16 million in Measure U fund balance. So part of what Chief Sell did earlier this year, probably a couple meetings ago, was he brought up to the council kind of a report on conditions within the fire department. And so part of that included a summary of the critical areas to be utilized in the fire department to potentially use some of the Measure U fund balance to make some of these improvements in some of our fire stations. I know Chief Poos is working on something similar for the police department, so we can start utilizing some of that fund balance and start making some additional improvements that maybe weren't necessarily captured in 2015 or 2016. So it's a really good point that you made. On that same note, we've also had general fund, non-Measure U fund balances increase, and that's part of what I mentioned about sound fiscal policies and not creating a budget that's unbalanced. So I've made a commitment to the management team as well as the council. Don't expect to get an unbalanced budget from me. And that's just the way that I operate. Just by way of background, I spent about 8.5 years in the city of San Bernardino. That city went bankrupt. So some of the things that happened there, the same type of things, including deficit spending after deficit spending after deficit spending. So luckily we've changed that tune based on the council's prudent fiscal policies. And so it is, I will say, is a pattern that's developed now with having the last 3 years budgets being balanced and surpluses based on the audited financial statements.
However, if you didn't add that Measure U funding into the general fund, then it's coming up that it wouldn't be, the city wouldn't be balanced. You'd be at a deficit.
So this is what, and this is kind of the brutal honesty of what we had to grapple with in 2020, 2021.
And we were there.
You were there, and I remember the chaos that was going on with respect to what this whole thing was going to do to revenues. Even the leading experts, whether it's the Southern California Association of Governments, whether it was the Western Riverside Council of Governments, all projected that the city of Hemet, as well as our financial experts, that we would be suffering some of the most damaging results as a result of the pandemic. So everybody projected some pretty dire experiences with the financials. So what did that mean? It meant prioritizing existing positions in the city of Hemet, public safety, and not carrying vacant positions to have right off the bat an unbalanced budget. So yes, that's exactly, I hear you loud and clear. I remember that those were some of the most stressful times. I don't anticipate that we ever experience something like that ever again. I sure hope to never have to go through that again. I am happy and pleased to say that because of the change up in prioritizing existing filled positions within police and fire, that there were no reductions in force that had to be done in public safety. In the other general fund departments, there were reductions in force in order to balance the budget. And I can tell you right off the bat that there were some layoffs as a result of the predicted decline in revenues in non-safety departments. So it isn't something that we're proud of. It's not something that we can say, oh, that was a great time. It hurt. And it hurt all of us because we all had to, suffer from the projected revenues. And for those that lost their jobs, it hurt even more. And so that was the reality that we had. Fortunately, public safety did have Measure U to help make sure that no reductions in force happened on the public safety side. But yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
And I think when the former committee, it was difficult for us too, to make that recommendation to the council, the one-time use of the 2.1 or 2.2 million. But when we weighted against laying off 11 or 12 public safety officers in police and at least 5 in fire, it was our recommendation that, the one-time money would be utilized. And I think the city even did early retirement incentives, which may have reduced the potential layoffs to a couple less, but it was not an easy decision. And I'm happy that it's only a one-time use of.
Well, the city was already working on a skeleton crew already. I mean, through all the departments, even the city maintenance, they were at a skeleton crew and things started getting outsourced. We don't even cut our own trees. We outsourced that to a tree company, but it's just that I understand that Measure U came in probably at a pretty good time for us because we were at a deficit really bad. We needed it. We needed more police. We needed more fire. We needed that. And then the pandemic hit, and it just so happened that people started, staying home and spending where they live and not spending out where they don't, where they travel, so where they work. And by people staying home and working from home, that created a lot of income for us because usually think about it, if you work in Riverside and you're leaving your job, where are you going to shop? You're going to stop by the store in Riverside. You're not going to wait to get home to Hemet and then go shopping because it's late. So that's where you're spending your money, is where you work. So a lot of people working from home, I think that really helped us generate our income for Hemet and help support Hemet through that pandemic. However, again, without Measure U, and it shows that Measure U, our funding was going up. We were only guesstimating about 10 million a year, and we've actually gone up above that. And we've managed to keep it above that for the last 4 to 5 years that we've had it. So I think that's awesome that we promote in-house spending. However, the look of it, of that, take that completely out of the equation, we're still, we're gonna grapple with, balancing our budget for the city. And I understand that because you've hired, I think we've hired 4 new people in City Hall, and we're looking at a 5th. Is that, am I off on that, or have you hired 4 new people, or?
Probably citywide, I'd say, yeah, we
Yeah.
probably increased FTEs, but
We
even
have.
even if that, fully
Yeah.
burdened is, $80,000, $320,000 is not the cause of the budget deficit.
I know, well, we were behind, I mean, for years, we've been behind. So, and part of our problem is that we kept going through city managers. And that was another reason that we couldn't, we were going through them once a year. I felt really bad for you, but I mean, once a year was, somebody new, and it's like relearning the game all over again. And then you've got somebody coming in and then they've got to relearn the game all over again. We've been, it's been great that you've wanted to stay even after Alan left and didn't want to stay, and you took on that job, and coming in on that after the background of coming from a city that did go bankrupt. So but I mean, like I said, let's go back to Measure U. Is it's not that we're questioning what the police and fire are spending their money on. It's just where else is that money going, and making sure that it is going to police and fire and not out to other expenditures that it shouldn't be going to. So, and the radios, I mean, Dave Brown talked about those radios for the police way back in 15 when he was still police chief, and he knew back then that they didn't have good radios, and even the cars were old. I mean, they had radios. Makes me think of that old cop show. I don't know, but anyway, so yeah, so I don't want to, for me personally, for you guys to have to sit here and sell us on why you need Measure U money. I'm all good. I don't need to know why.
Should we move on to, I don't know, the auditor?
Sure,
Well,
Chief Sell to go to the fire department.
Go ahead,
Convince me you need it.
So a couple comments. First of all, good evening to everybody. And I also have Chief Lloyd with me, and Chief Lloyd's been here in Hemet for 4 years. So he's got more background in history. He's been intimately involved with, obviously, Measure U. So with that being said, and with your comments, committee member, I'm done. Just kidding.
Like always, police chief clears the scene.
This guy. Yeah. I still got to get him back for the other day. Yeah, he knows what I'm talking about. But no, I love this guy. So, and Chief Lloyd will provide additional commentary if I'm missing something, if you have any additional questions. But you can see, much like what Chief Boos did, this slide is kind of self-explanatory here. If you start on the left-hand column under personnel, and then moving down into operating supplies and services, major machinery and equipment, internal services, and then the Measure U in support of general fund fire. Down the bottom, same thing. Much like his comment earlier, you can see some asterisks that talk about balance, and then what's been carried over to fiscal year 21-22. And then you can see the sum of money of $991,615 project balance carried over to fiscal year 21-22. So highlights for us in the fire department, you can see the images really kind of tell the story, which is pretty awesome. You can see starting from the left, moving to the right, the communications and radio upgrade. Chief Poost, he kind of mentioned a lot of the things relative to communications. Again, much like PD, fire, that is one of the #1 tools that we have, right? Is communication. So, and it's really exciting to be, have a partner in public safety that I can tell you that we speak daily, and we're talking about all sorts of things to make sure that our departments are interacting better more than ever to serve the community. So it's a good thing. And then not only that, but same with his law enforcement partners. I have to be able to interact with all of our regional partners as well in the county, and even for statewide mutual aid. So you can see right here the communications as far as what was done there. There was an enhancement to the existing VHF radio system. This project was completed and included replacement of outdated repeaters, as well as the construction of a new radio tower at Simpson Park. So that's a good thing, right? So you need high repeaters in order to transmit that signal so that we can all communicate better. And much like our law enforcement partners, firefighters, we have challenges in certain types of buildings. The same thing, you could be right next to somebody and not even get through. So comms are a big part of that. And then Chief Lloyd, do you want to expand on PSEC a little bit? Because it's going to affect us in a positive way as well.
Just to give you a little background on that. So in 2019, we had a citywide catastrophic failure of the radio system. I happened to be working on duty when that day, and it basically meant nobody could talk to anybody. Dispatch couldn't talk to personnel. Personnel couldn't talk to one another. It's probably the scariest thing I'd ever have as a chief officer, is when I can't talk to my people. We turned out that went through and some backgrounds tried to replace updated or outdated systems. We couldn't find them. That basically you were trying to find a piece that wasn't made anymore. So it was so antiquated, so outdated, it wasn't supported. We had gotten emergency support from our partners at CAL FIRE. They brought a portable repeater in, put it in, got us back up working in an emergency system. So that's a testament to how we work in public safety, supporting one another. Very quickly, police and fire got together, got with a group called Pegasus Telecommunications, and they said, hey, we have two problems here. One, we need to fix something immediately. And then two, we need to look going forward with that. So that project, those two phases got together. They were able to find us, believe it or not, somewhere up in Santa Barbara, a repeater of our age. And that was great. So it got us up and running. And then that started the process of saying, what is the best thing for us to do? One, we needed to increase and make our VHF radio system, brought it up to where it could be serviced now. And then the next step was, as Chief Cook said, with the encryption moving forward, how are we going to move to that? With a VHF system, everybody can hear, everybody with a scanner can hear, and all of that. And so that doesn't work for the police department. The fire department, all of our partners are on VHF, so it's been a better advantage for us to stay on VHF. However, we didn't want to run into the same system that we had with a catastrophic radio failure. So what we were all able to do was become emergency users on the PSEC system. We're the first fire department in Riverside County to become users on the PSEC system. And what that did for us is that not only we had an increase in a more robust system of VHF, but we now have a fail-safe. So if we have a failure, we have one click of the switch, move our radio over to a completely different system, and we can talk. So we're never going to have that problem again. So not only did we fix the existing problem, but we started that forward thinking about moving forward for any potential issues. And so with PSEC, it's an entirely different radio band. It's a higher band. It has encryption. It's digital. And so we have the ability to use that whenever we need to. We use it on an emergency basis because all of our partners right now, and we use mutual aid pretty extensively, not only receiving it from the county, but also giving it. We're a very active partner in the east side, in San Jac, all around as far as helping out our neighbors. And so we use that, the VHF on a regular basis, and then we use the PSEC on an emergency basis.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm actually going to go and tour the facility on Thursday, the PSEC, and then every couple of weeks, PD and fire are getting together regularly to talk about and address all the communication issues. So I can tell you guys that aside from even what Measure U is doing, the communication part of the plan is very, very strong, and we're certainly looking to enhance and innovate wherever we can, so and just be more effective. So over to the public safety dispatch, Chief Pust already kind of mentioned some of this as well. So currently the fire department supports 2 public safety dispatchers and 1 call taker to facilitate over 100,000 calls a year that come into the combined police and fire dispatch center, which is incredibly busy. The dispatcher positions are a critical element towards the implementation of emergency medical dispatch, and as well as ensuring for adequate dispatcher staffing levels, critical firefighter and police officer safety. So you'll hear the term EMD quite a bit. It's actually in the strategic plan as well, and that's something that our communication group is also working towards. So we're looking at some options that we have right now with Ontario Fire Department, also with our partners at CAL FIRE, and trying to see what's going to be the best cost-effective approach to take that piece on, which is going to be really beneficial. So Measure U funds were also utilized for equipment, cabling, and labor to increase the number of dispatcher consoles in the center from 5 to 6. The addition of this console is another element necessary as part of the EMD program continues to evolve. Anything on that one? Okay, over to firefighter safety equipment. So you can see the picture. It's kind of Hammond Fire Department is unique, wearing black turnout gear. You'll kind of see that historically with East Coast fire departments. Also here in California, there's only a handful that have them. Northern California, San Francisco, Oakland, Sacramento, a lot of departments have that. And it basically, believe it or not, I mean, it stays a little cleaner, right? You know, the fact that it's black, and there's no difference just in terms of heat or any of those things, you know, compared to like a lighter color, for example. And it does provide, you know, kind of a culture and identity for our firefighters that can make the Hammett firefighters unique. So if there was a picture, right, that's out there, and so you would definitely know if there was our mutual aid partners around us in Riverside County, because our Hammett firefighters are the only ones wearing black turnout gear. So it's kind of a cool thing that I think that our troops appreciate, you know, having their own identity. They take pride in being very, very busy. And so, you know, I know for me as the fire chief, that's certainly something that, you know, if it's rewarding to them, you know, that's low hanging fruit. And at the same time, it's really, you know, we value the fact that they're in the best possible gear that they can have. So Measure U funds were able to help out with buying additional structural PPE, like you can see in the picture on the right.
Chief?
Yes.
For the new members, she and I went through and we were showed the old equipment. I spent enough time in college doing my summer firefighting, but some of those turnouts, they reminded me of being back in college and having the patch pants and all. It was bad. That was probably one of the easiest thumbs up meetings for Measure U to say, yes, get those things now.
And it means a lot. I can tell you, it means a lot to the men and women of the fire department, and I truly appreciate it because it's a big deal. It says a lot about, well, like you saw, right? You saw firsthand, right? I think when we see our apparatus, facilities, you know, gear, that's a reflection of our city, of our leadership, and we all care very much about how that looks. And they are out there 24/7, right? They are out there all the time. So no, I appreciate that. We were actually able to purchase an additional 12 sets during FY 2021 with Measure U funds. So thank you for that. And unless you have anything further, we did have an additional information, but it looks like, I don't know if the personnel.
Total personnel?
Did you see this one on the bottom? Just a few more.
Yeah, so that's the conversation related to prioritizing existing personnel. And so part of what was done last year for fiscal year 2020, 2021 is finding a funding source for existing personnel. That meant that battalion chiefs that were at one point funded by the general fund, because we didn't have the projected budget to make that happen, they were moved over to Measure U to not have any reductions on that side. So that was something that was done in fiscal year 2020, 2021. Similar to what we did with PD, where we had vacancies in Measure U, or I'm sorry, in the general fund. We removed some of those vacancies in order to prioritize existing personnel to have them funded by the city versus carrying on vacancies and perpetuating a deficit. So that is something that we did in the fire department.
And Chief, I'm really happy you discussed emergency medical dispatch.
Yes.
Because we've been hearing about it for 4 years.
Yes.
Going on maybe 5.
Yeah.
But I mean, I realize what a challenge it is to hire and retain dispatchers, probably more so than officers and firefighters. But I'm glad you're looking at other options because I think it's so critical to the community.
So yeah, and I can share with you, and nothing is set in stone yet, but we are looking for ways to implement it sooner rather than later and work with a partner like Ontario Fire that can facilitate something for that for, you know, a year or so while we internally continue to work together and get our dispatch, you know, center where it should be in order to be able to handle that through recruitment, retention, and training.
And every dispatcher is being trained both sides.
Yes, they, all our dispatchers cross-trained, so they handle fire and police. So we do have call takers that just answer the calls, but we call it radio. The dispatchers work in radio. They'll work for radio for fire or radio for PD. So somebody's always designated in each area. And we've expanded our, just because of the call volume that we get consistently throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. We've expanded our dispatch center to take on that future call volume.
What about grants? Have you thought about, I mean, are there any grants out there?
There are, and we do look at grants for different things, and then we certainly have that conversation. We look at and see what's available, and then see what we can bring to the city manager and to staff, and to, you know, see about the implementation. But yeah, in fact, we just were awarded a what we call the CHOG grant for hazmat. That was just, I just received that email today, so that'll be another $67,000 that comes and helps out with hazmat equipment, PPE, some of those things. We're going to be applying for a fire prevention grant as well. Our brand new fire prevention officer, Natalie Steenekin, she actually started today, which was awesome, and she's amazing. So really excited about that. And Chief Lloyd, he is actually the bureau head for the Fire Prevention Bureau. So he kind of took her around today and did a little tour, and we put her through a little orientation, and also had a meeting with the current contract fire prevention company that we have called CSG. So we're looking to you know, do some phases basically as we continue to have our fire prevention program grow. And you're going to see a lot more community involvement basically with public education and things that we do, much like the chair was asking me earlier, you know. Yeah, I've already got a bunch of Post-its lined up, you know, ready to roll. So yeah.
On that same note, one of the first things that Chief Sell did when he was on board, he facilitated a grant for fire explorers. So maybe Chief, you can talk about that grant and what that hopefully will do for our future fire personnel and hopefully future firefighters of the department.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I'm an advocate. I'm a product of having been a fire explorer myself and a volunteer firefighter in high school. So I know the value of, you know, paying it forward and just reaching back and, you know, making sure that we tap into our youth. So we actually were able to get a donation for the Fire Explorer program for the sum of $15,000, which is amazing. And when people that have been here for years, I mean, they were shocked, which was really cool to see. And that was an incredible night, you know, for sure. That was really emotional. And we're also doing some other things right now, working with the school district, you know, working on some MOUs and some language on some future programs that we're really trying to do to kind of make sure that, well, and again, you know, recruitment and retention has short-term, you know, ways to address it, but then long-term, right? So we need to make a long-term investment right back here in Hemet and make sure that we're creating our own, you know, pool, if you will, right? Our own bench of talent that's right here. So I think much like the law enforcement, the fire service is seeing a really weird time. When I took Long Beach's test, you know, 25 years ago, 10,000 people took that test, right? And nowadays, you know, you're having to, you know, fire chiefs are having to sell being a firefighter. It's really, it's awkward, you know? And so, so it's not just a Hemet problem. I could tell you, sitting on statewide committees and other things that I do, aside from being the fire chief, it's everywhere. It truly is. So again, I go back to one of the things that we really have to do is focus on youth programs, the Explorers, and we're planning on having the Explorers a lot more involved with city programs, you know, interacting with a lot of the other city departments. And it's just such a great way for them to learn, you know, the value, right, of community service.
And Chief Coos, I didn't get to commend you, but thank you so much for you and what you and your staff are doing, for all the accomplishments you've made so far, and I know there'll be many more. And also Chief Bell. I want to call you Eddie, but
You can call me Eddie. You can call me anything you want.
Well, both of
Eddie
you.
and Chief Eddie.
Yeah.
I know.
We'll turn around.
Eddie squared.
Eddie squared. You can't. That's our line.
Are there any more questions or should we move on to the next item?
Okay, so the next item, we'll hand it over to Lorena to talk about the actual ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, which is the document that I sent to the committee probably maybe 3 weeks ago, which was received and filed by the council the 22nd of February. And so now it's coming to the Oversight Committee to have some discussion on that. And I would like to note that over the last couple of years, we've made some changes to the audit to make sure that the committee within the actual ACFR itself that goes to council has a specific note so that the Oversight Committee can see the details related to Measure U. So Lorena?
Thank you. That was actually what I was going to start with. You know, we're always trying to look for ways to be more transparent and to show the public what it is they want to see. There are accounting standards that restrict us, like I mentioned earlier, from noting it as its own fund, but within our note section, we are able to put more information. And so starting in fiscal year 1920s, we increased the information included with the fund balance breakdown. So you'll find that in note 10 of the ACFR, and it's the breakdown that is up there. So what that shows you is the revenues that came in from Measure U with the split of 2/3 for police, 1/3 for fire. The overall revenues were $14.8 million. And then the breakdown by department and by expenditure category, salaries and fringe benefits, operating supplies and services, internal service charges, and capital outlay, which capital outlay is machinery and equipment, improvements to buildings, anything like that. So their total expenditures for both departments was just under $9.6 million. And right below it, you see Measure U in support of general fund public safety. This was what we were talking about earlier. And we've talked about a lot today. When we started our budget process, we normally start in the background. Finance starts in January. So January, February, we're already pretty well into it. By March, our departments are involved. They're starting to give us projections. They're starting to give us their needs and let us know what they're going to need when the pandemic hit. And it was very scary and very uncertain times. And so we had to find a way to not have layoffs, but not move public safety personnel directly under Measure U so that it didn't look like Measure U was supplementing general fund on the long run. So what we decided was that the best way to do it was to keep them as general fund employees in hopes that the next year would be better. And fortunately, so far it has been. And the best way to manage it was through an operating transfer so that it would be a one-time deal. We were going to use money that Measure U could offer to help limit the layoffs or anything like that that would happen on the general fund side. And so that's what this line is. Police contributed $2,253,000. Fire contributed $159,000. For police, that was an equivalent of about 12 officers. For fire, this was the equivalent of about 1 firefighter, although they used other ongoing revenues to help support, their other needs. So you have below that the change in Measure U operating funds, which is an increase of just under $2.8 million. And then you have the beginning fund balance from prior year 1920 of 13.4. So gives you ending fund balance of $16,194,000. It is important to note that there is a prepayment in here. That prepayment is for that fire engine that was purchased at the very tail end of 1920. Initially, when they placed the order, we were told by the vendor, if you prepay, you get a better price. So we prepaid. The engine, I believe, is here, but not yet in service.
Correct.
So
It will be in a few short weeks.
yay.
Yeah.
So it's parked in prepaid, and in the current budget year, there's an expenditure line so that when it's put into service, we can show it now as an expense, take it out of prepaid. So the true balance that is uncommitted is $15.5 million. So that's what's in the ACFR. I think now we're going to go into the AUP. The AUP, I do have Terry Shea and Evelyn Morantine Barcena from RAMS on Zoom with us. So if there are questions regarding the AUP, they can jump in and help me answer some of these things, or, you know, if you want to hear it independently from them, why it was done, how it was done, they're here to support us. But an AUP is very similar to an audit, but on a smaller scale. An AUP focuses on reporting findings based on specific procedures performed on a specific matter. In this case, the recommendation was to perform an AUP on Measure U. Not a full-blown audit, because our audit does that. And in order to create the note that they created within the ACFR, the audit firm that performs the citywide audit had to do additional work to feel confident in the numbers that they put in here. But the AUP focuses on specific items that we asked them to look at. So they're listed here. Obtain and evaluate the summary revenue detail reports from the city's general ledger for Measure U transaction and use tax. They did that, and no exceptions were noted. And I believe, and Evelyn can chime in, I believe she also reached out to the state and received independent confirmation that what the state is saying they sent to us as Measure U is what we received. Is that correct, Evelyn?
Yes, that's correct, Lorena.
Thank you. The second item on the AUP was to evaluate the summary expenditure detail report from the city's general ledger to ensure that the expenditures were allowed per resolution 4731 and 4703 and ordinance 1918. In this case, no exceptions were noted, but there is a comment issued, and we're going to get to that comment in a little bit. I just want to get through these, and then we can expand on anything that was noted. The third was to obtain and evaluate select payroll transactions to determine whether the allocation of salaries and benefits for Measure U were reasonable. No exceptions were noted there, and some of what they asked for were labor distribution reports, so reports that are generated when the payrolls are done. They asked me for specific payroll reports on specific days. So I think I believe I sent Evelyn 4 different payrolls. And then to support that, they also asked me for the PAF, which is a personnel action form, that shows them that the employees that were charged to Measure U were in fact budgeted and supposed to be in Measure U.
So if someone had a question about, well, that police officer or that, let's just say, for lack of a better word, that public works director was charged to Measure U, how can you prove that? That's part of the detail that these auditors do to ensure that what we're saying is being expended by Measure U, that they're having some confidence in what we're saying.
And again, no exceptions were noted there. Then they were asked to obtain and evaluate select maintenance and operations expenditures for reasonableness. Again, they asked for, what they do is they take a sampling. They asked me for a detailed report, which is a very long report of every single transaction that happens within Measure U. And that report gives them check numbers, vendor names, where it was charged, when it was charged, and they selected a group of invoices that they wanted to look at. We had to provide, if a purchase order was issued, a copy of the purchase order, a copy of the invoice with all of the signature authorizations to pay that invoice, and then a copy of the check that shows how it was paid out. No
Again,
exceptions were noted there.
Again, if someone made the accusation, well, you're buying lawnmowers, using Measure U fund balance, or you're purchasing city clerk's office new furniture, that's really what they're trying to test and see if those expenditures from a random selection are in line with the resolutions or in line with Measure U.
And the last item that they were asked to review was to confirm the ending fund balance for Measure U at June 30th, 2021. And they do have one finding noted. A finding in this AUP is not what a finding in an annual audit is. It's simply stating what they found, what was different, and we'll get into that in just a minute. So the first item we're going to look at is that finding. There was a difference between the beginning balance of Measure U for the beginning of the year for both police and fire. Auditors obtained information and support for the differences, and they did note the variances. All of the variances are listed in the report. One of those bigger variances is that, well, let me skip forward. The AUP for 1920 was issued October 20th of 2020. But the city's annual comprehensive financial reports weren't issued until, I believe, March of 2021. So they were working with unaudited numbers.
Which we had made that very clear to the Measure U Oversight Committee, that you do these on audited numbers, but the request from the committee was to utilize unaudited numbers.
So that we can move forward and finish, it was 1819 and 1920, right? So when something like that happens, you run that risk. And so we provided all the information to them in September of 2020. The transaction to move the purchase of that fire engine out of an expenditure and into that prepaid account happened subsequent to the information that we provided. So that was one of their findings. The other ones in there were corrections where something should have been charged to Measure U, but wasn't, or there were two, one for PD and one for fire. So we prepay our unfunded liability to PERS every year in July, which allows us a 3% discount of what we're going to pay throughout the year, which when you're talking about $8 million, it's a significant amount of money. So we always prepay. So what we do is we park that liability in an account, and as we're starting to charge actual PERS liability to the departments for the employees that are here, because you break it out by employee as a percentage of salary, so you can charge the department. So when we do that at the end, we have to true it up. We have to say, okay, we either had a balance left over or we needed more money to make it whole. And in this particular instance, we had a balance left over. So we returned money to the police Measure U and the fire Measure U departments. So the note here, and Evelyn or Terry, if you can chime in, the note here was just to state that the beginning fund balance for 2021 was different than what they had previously received when they completed the AUP for 1920. Evelyn or Terry?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, Lorena, that's correct. So as Lorena stated, we did have the AUP completed prior to the financial statement completion for 1920, which was the main reason for, those variances in the beginning fund balance. So, and we did take a look at all the information. We got support for all the journal entries posted and for the actual individual invoices that were charged to Measure U, and everything that we reviewed was in line with the measure. So once we took all those things into consideration, we were comfortable with the beginning balance of Measure U.
Thank you, Evelyn. Excellent, thanks. Okay, now we're going to go into the comment that was issued, and again, that was when they evaluated the summary expenditure detail report of the city's general ledger to ensure expenditures were allowed per resolutions 47.1 and 47.3 and ordinance 1918. And I'm going to read what the comment was. It is in the report that was included in your backup, but for sake of the discussion, I'm going to read it. In fiscal year 2021, there were additional funds of $2,413,068, $2,253,867 for police, and $159,201 for fire, allocated by City Council to support the general fund police and fire expenditures in order to maintain the levels of support and staffing for those departments. We did not perform a detailed review of these expenditures. However, the use of Measure U funds are allowed to be used for any public safety purpose and therefore were considered to be in line with Measure U. For the police department, we noted that of the $2,253,867, only $1,796,990 were utilized in fiscal year 2020-2021. The remainder of the funds allocated to support general fund expenditures will be rolled to fiscal year 21-22 and applied towards eligible expenditures. We did not consider this to be a finding. However, we determined this information to be relevant to the users of this report. Next slide, please. And so, as we do with findings with our annual audit, we asked for the opportunity to provide some background from a management response to what we call it normally. I will say that they do have a disclosure in the report that they didn't verify the numbers that are in here, because that would require a much larger scope. It would delay the AUP process. But what we wanted the committee to know and the public to know is police operations funded by general fund spent $20,902,424 of its original council approved budget of $21,359,300, which was a difference of $456,876. Of that amount, there were purchase orders in the amount of $30,275 already in process, but not completed at year end, plus an additional allocation of $106,229 in continuing appropriations, which were rolled along with their funding into fiscal year 21-22. So POs that were already started, that we've already committed to the vendor that we're going to pay. We can't, because it's June 30th, say, sorry, we're cutting it off and we're going to start fresh in the new year. We either have funding for it or we don't. We've already committed. We're already in a contractual, we already have a contractual obligation to complete that. So we can't just cancel those POs. The $106,000 in continuing appropriations are related to projects, items that were council approved, part of the budget, but not yet started for varying reasons. Sometimes it's because it's out of our control. I believe this one had to do with the PACT project, right? The PACT reimbursements. So there was still some time that hadn't been spent. And that comes from another agency, so we can't just do away with it. And so we continue it. So when we take those amounts into account, we reduce that from the $456,876 and believe that what was truly unspent is $320,372. On the fire side, the fire operations funded by the general fund used 100% of their Measure U funds in support of public safety, so the $159,201. In addition, though, the fire department exceeded their budget by $188,458, which was funded by the general funds fund balance. I already talked a little bit about this slide, but it's just talking about what we were up against when we were preparing the budget, why we felt that this was the best way to handle the situation that we had at the time, to use operating transfers. And so this shows you the breakdown of how much came from police and how much came from fire. Fortunately, we're in a different position and have survived that year. is what it feels like,
Well,
but,
It's been close to 2 years now that we're talking about this,
Yeah.
because this was being
yeah, we
prepared
started in early
2020.
yeah, January, February of 2020, when we started this process. So if you want to,
So, Lorena, did you want the auditors to say anything? Maybe provide a synopsis from their side?
Terry or Evelyn, if you guys would like to provide maybe some information of how the AUP process went. If you feel that you have certainty that Measure U expenditures were in accordance with the resolutions in the ordinance.
Are you ready, Evelyn?
Yeah, sorry. Hey, Lorna. Yeah, so we went through all the procedures and, thank you, to the city for, continuing to allow us to, be a part of this process and be able to, provide you with this assurance over, your Measure U revenues and expenditures. So yes, there were a little bit of ins and outs this year, with the reconciliation of fund balance and then, tracing of the transfers to, support of general fund, police and fire. But based on our procedures and the information that we reviewed, we feel comfortable that the expenditures for the current year were in line with Measure U. We didn't find anything contrary to that, including the, additional information that, we did look at for, the differences in fund balance. So we did not encounter anything that would cause us to believe that anything was used in the expenditures that we reviewed that were not in line with the measure.
And from what you said earlier, Lorena, about the general fund being in there and moving in and out, and keeping it on spreadsheets, it's complicated and difficult, and then with the timing of the audits. But going forward, setting up a separate fund just to track and then merge with the general fund at the end of the year, and then doing the AUPs after the city audit is done, so we know exactly what we're looking at. And the financial auditors do look at that revenue, and they confirm that revenue as well, and they do payroll testing. So those and the expenditures, if there's capital assets, they definitely look at any capital assets purchased. So all those numbers are being audited, and the AUP lets us get a little bit more into the compliance side of it, look at that kind of stuff a little bit deeper. It kind of adds to the audit.
And to add to that, one of the things that we did, and I asked Terry and Evelyn to work with me now so that we're not in a position where, we're doing an audit before, or an AUP before audited numbers, is that we've already scheduled the AUP for the current fiscal year for the second week in January, Evelyn?
Correct, yes, the second week in January, given that the financial statements have been issued.
And we expect to have those issued by December 31st.
Awesome.
Those are done, they'll have audited numbers. They're not going to change, and so they have the certainty that those are the final numbers and they can proceed with their AUP.
I do have a question either for, I'm sorry, Terry, did I cut you off before you?
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I do have a question. This came up earlier today. But essentially the question is, how come you don't audit Measure U? And I know that question came up last year, but essentially, how come you're not auditing Measure U?
Well, everything is covered under your regular city audit, and especially now since they've added additional amounts to your notes. So they do audit that revenue, and they do audit those expenditures. And so we found that an AUP and specific items that the city wanted to look at to make sure they were complying with the ordinances would be a better way to go. There is an audit of a specified element of a financial statement. So you could do that, but I think, those numbers are already being audited, and you have a very reputable firm, one of the top firms in the state. And so that should give people some comfort that those expenditures are correct and those revenues are correct. I mean, it just, when we talked about it, it was because the ordinance just says those must be part of the general fund and they must be audited along with the other items. And so you are satisfying the ordinance from that standpoint. And that's why we decided like a AUP would be a little bit easier or not easier, but a little bit more in depth, and you could choose exactly what you wanted to see and make sure that you were complying with your ordinances and your resolutions. So,
So correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is that the annual audit, which is done by
VLF.
VLF, is the annual audit that's done on Measure U because it is part of the comprehensive audit. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
So then an AUP is an additional level of review that you do to not only look at the audited numbers, but also provide additional review of the respective resolutions and ordinances. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Lorna, did you have any other questions for the auditors?
I don't.
Terry or Evelyn, did you want to add anything else on your side?
I just thank Lorena for all her hard work and effort to get this thing turned around quickly. And kudos to the city from where you were to where you're at, and then to get that report done by 12/31 next year. That's got to give the citizens some assurance that you're heading in the right direction. So,
One final question that I do have for you, Terry and Evelyn. The type of review that you've done, this AUP, is that common with these types of taxes? Is it common for a city to ask you to do this type of work, to take a harder look into some of these revenues and expenditures? Is that a standard practice for you?
yeah, it's standard. We probably do it for about 20% of our clients. A lot of them will take certain elements of their financial statements or certain procedures, and we'll do AUPs every year. And then they rotate different AUPs. A lot of lease agreements, like stadium lease agreements, like leases with where you have a golf course and a restaurant, those kind of agreements. They're usually all done with AUPs. So,
All right. Anything else to add on your side, Terry?
no, sir.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Lorena. And I know I'm extremely appreciative of your work and Terry's work. I know that I was pushing really hard to get this squared away, so thank you.
And I think Evelyn felt that too, right, Evelyn?
So I
Yeah,
was
ran against the wire, but we got it done.
I was the mystery push behind the scenes, so it sounds like it was conveyed pretty well to you all. So thank you for that. So with that being said, does the committee have any questions related to the AUP or the audit that Lorena or the auditors can answer before we get into the key questions related to Measure U?
I think I had a question, and it was similar to our citizen that spoke about, and I was just trying to find that, so I was grappling. I have so many papers here. So it was something that was in the letter, basically saying that they were not engaged to, nor did they not conduct an examination or review, the objective to which would be the expression of an opinion or conclusion on the Measure U revenues and expenses of the city. I kind of got the feeling that what they were saying is that they're not real. I mean, please help me understand, because that they weren't really verifying that everything was correct. But then when I heard them talk, it sounded like they did. So
I think Terry can explain it much better than I can, so I'm gonna let him.
Yeah, we don't audit it because audit requires internal control review on that kind of thing, and you already have an audit firm that does your internal control work and rely on their work. But what we do is we do verify, and we verified that the revenues recorded matched what the state said. So that was a step, so obtain the listing from the state of California and match the revenues, which we did. Obtain the list of expenses or expenditures the city charged, which is salaries and other stuff. And so then we obtained that list, and then we verified that yes, those people were police officers, and yes, that equipment was purchased for that. So we're not auditing it, but we're just verifying that what the city said they did, they did. I mean, it's a little bit different than an audit. There is such thing as an audit of a specified element of a financial statement, where you go in more in depth and you can actually issue a report, just like a one-line item report. That doesn't usually involve any compliance type things, like with resolutions and ordinances and that kind of a thing. And so it allows us just to, even though we say we don't audit it, we do look at it and we do verify that the numbers are correct. So
Terry, let me ask this question before the committee member has another chance to ask another question. Does the independent auditor look at the Measure U revenues and expenditures to ensure it's correct and factual?
What an independent auditor would, your regular city audit, I mean, we do quite a few cities. And what you try to do when you're looking at city revenues and expenditures, you're comparing current year to prior year. And then you're also trying to tie out like the major revenue sources. And one thing almost all audit firms will do is they will obtain from the state of California or I forget is it California? What is the agency, Evelyn?
The California Department of Taxes and Federal Administration, CDTFA.
Right. So they provide a listing, an Excel listing that shows all 12 payments, July through June, and then the city accrues the first two in July and August of the next year in those numbers. And so almost 100% of all auditors, sorry about that, about 100% of all auditors will obtain that schedule. And so you can obtain 100% assurance that that number is correct in about a 5-minute time period. And all auditors will do payroll audits, and payroll audits will include the police department. And anytime you purchase any equipment, you have a schedule of additions, deletions, and they will verify all those additions. So those numbers are being looked at by your regular auditors and on an annual basis.
And you will find that in the actual ACFR that I sent the PDF link of. So that's the document that Terry's referencing.
And I did confirm with Brett from VLF, who is the managing partner on this, that they did in fact independently check with the state, get the list from the state to make sure that all the revenues for Measure U and for non-Measure U that came from the state were in fact in line with our books.
Because when we audit, if there's something we can verify to the penny, we like to do it. So
Yes, they do.
Any?
Okay, so you're basically saying that you would also confirm with your numbers that the resolution 1918 and the resolution 4703, that those were, that everything you audited fall in line with those two.
yeah, the procedures were designed around the resolutions in the ordinance. So that's.
Thank you.
Chair, any other questions for the auditors while we have them on here?
I don't have any. Does anyone else?
Okay, so Chair, with that being said, the 4 questions that we're looking to have the committee discuss are: the first one, are the audited expenditures of police and fire in line with resolutions 4703, 4731, and ordinance 1918? The second question: does the committee wish to provide commentary on recommending the transfer of general fund back to the Measure U fund for funds unspent by the police department in the amount of $320,372? Third question: does the committee wish to provide commentary on recommending a transfer from Measure U funds to the general fund for fire department expenses in excess of budgeted items in the amount of $188,458? And then finally, question number 4: does the committee authorize the chair and the vice chair to sign a letter affirming the findings from questions 1, 2, and 3 on behalf of the Measure U Oversight Committee to the Hemet City Council? So that concludes our presentation, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, the reports I got didn't have anything about the 188,000. I don't know if anybody, maybe.
Yeah, that wasn't included in the
Okay.
staff report, but it was an identification after the agenda was posted, that was something that if it applies to the PD savings related to funds unspent in Measure U, we felt that the committee should probably weigh in on funds overspent that were covered by the general fund that were essentially scheduled to be in Measure U. So we figured, it's kind of like if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Kind of wanted to get the committee's input on that.
I mean, are we gonna get any detail on the 188?
So Lorena can probably talk about what the
I'm not-
overage
Just
is.
generally, like that.
I don't have the specifics of it. I can tell you that usually their overtime is what pushes them over. And it's because they have minimum staffing requirements. So even if they have a vacancy, they can't leave that vacancy. They have to backfill it with overtime. And that's usually what pushes them over. So it wasn't purchases, because purchases, we're always constantly communicating with them. Hey, you're over budget, or are you sure you're hitting the right line? But with payroll, it's different. It's a little more complicated, and overtime is usually where it hits.
Okay, should we take these questions one at a time then?
Whatever the committee would like to do. I've got my pen and paper, so I'm ready to take notes.
Okay, I've got the question number one. Do we have any discussion or comments on the question number one? Are the audited expenditures of police and fire in line with resolution 4703, 4731, and ordinance 1918?
So I'm going to go back to what I grappled with last week.
Okay.
And that is the salaries. So it's broken out here a little bit on page 21 of 222. Which, by the way, I think maybe there's a little error, because in the top under revenues, it says police share is 1/3. I think that should say 2/3.
Yes, I noticed that
It
too.
should be 2/3.
Yeah.
Okay, but so basically 23 positions for fire are funded under Measure U, and 19 FTEs are funded for police. And I'm still trying to figure out if the obviously it's all fire and police, so I get that.
Mhm.
But if the intention of the money was originally to boost it, then how did we get all of these positions, Measure U to be paying for all of these positions when they weren't new positions? We're just paying basically for the city. So I'm still grappling with that, because I kind of feel like, shouldn't we have more money to give them more positions and fund the things that they need versus paying salaries that had already been.
So this goes back to the fundamental question that I started the discussion with, that in fiscal year 15-16, the budget was adopted with a $5 million deficit. So essentially what was happening was the city was using its savings account or 401k or other one-time monies to maintain those levels of staffing. And so the only way that we could have added new positions without further burdening the ongoing deficit was to continue the deficit spending and leaving all the status quo as it was back in 15-16. So the struggle has been for the last 4 years of getting away from one-time spending, because as we all know, one-time spending will disappear at some point. And so if you don't get a hold of your one-time spending, so you don't utilize all of your reserves, that's when you have to make difficult decisions about, okay, what's going to be funded and what's going to be that funding source. So if we were to say, in hindsight, that Measure U was going to be done to add services, assuming that the general fund was fully balanced, then yeah, I think you'd be perfectly fine by saying we're going to add all these positions. But the big elephant in the room is, well, what are you going to do to balance your budget in fiscal year 15-16 of the general fund? Because Measure U was never anticipated to shore up that gap. Does that make sense?
And at what point in time, so we continue paying those, right? So at what point in time does the city take back what they should have been paying for in the first place? Because the city's doing fine now, right? And they should be putting, forgive me, 79, 72, 72%. And is that only for,
That happens every year.
is that for both fire and police?
So we
72%?
took 72% of revenues and we split it same way, 2/3, 1/3, because when you look at true expenditures, that's the true split. So even though it seems like a kind of a simple split that somebody just came up with, no, that's a true split of what public safety costs. So, I've been with the city for 15 years. And so unlike many people in the room, I have been at every single one of these meetings, as well as all of the budget meetings on the behind the scenes of getting this stuff prepared. And so I've looked at over the years all of the plans that both chiefs have had, prior chiefs, to increase their department, whether you want to call it police or boots on the ground or support or however. And each year they say, okay, this year I need to add X amount of officers or X amount of firefighters. I also need to add whether it's community service officers or dispatch or anything like that. So I've seen that. And when we focus on the budget, we say, okay, this is your Measure U money and this is what you have to deal with. What can you afford with it? Then on the general fund side, we say, this is what we think our revenues are going to be. 72% has to be for public safety. So we never lower that and say Measure U is going to cover the difference. We always have 72%. You can look every year, it is 72%. It's budgeted that way because that is a requirement of the ordinance or the resolution. I don't remember which of the two it's specifically in, but they're budgeted independent of each other. So even if Measure U is getting more positions because they have the funding for it, general fund might not have the funding for the positions that they have. So general fund may be losing positions, but it doesn't mean that Measure U, that they're just transferring them over there. That's not what's happening. They're just treated independently of each other or budgeted independently of each other.
The other thing that I'll add too is I wish we had constant expenditures in all departments, but the reality of it is that in 2016, there was an MOU that, or I think it was 2017, that was retro to 2016, an MOU that went into effect that changed compensation for police and fire. And so the growth of those expenditures meant that if we grew our revenues, even on the general fund side or even on Measure U, the cost for providing the officer back in 2015, I wish we had that same cost in the sense of I'd be able to say, okay, well, he's fully burdened at X amount of dollars and it's going to stay the same. But the reality of it is all those additions, whether it's compensation or whether it's even the PERS liability, continues to grow. So the officer, if I look at the police department in 2015 and their FTEs and the total cost per FTE, I wish that it was the same exact cost, but unfortunately, the cost for that same officer today is far greater for things that are out of both chiefs' control, out of Lorena's control, and out of my control. So each officer costs more now than they did in 2015 or 2016 because of PERS liabilities, because of increases to compensation, all of those other things that inflate the budget that we've got to account for on our budget side.
And also, not speaking for the fire chief, but when Measure U was first passed, there was no command staff in fire. It was basically fire chief, captain. And so 3 battalion chief positions were funded by Measure U according to the chief's report. So, they were very, very much needed. When I worked here, there were battalion chiefs, and then when I came back, no battalion chiefs. So there's no way just the chief could handle all of that.
And I appreciate that comment, I really do, and they're incredibly important to, again, I go back to this fire department's incredibly busy, and I can tell you right now, there's no other command staff in any comparable size city that has as lean of a command staff as us. So I'm really proud of how hard they do work, and it's very necessary for command and control and for running all these incidents. So thank you.
Okay, well, what I just heard was that you really didn't answer her question. So what is the city paying? So if Measure U is paying for those 12 policemen, what is the city, the general fund, paying for then? If you're putting that into the Measure U fund, and she asked at some point, is that going to be moved back? You just talked circles around that.
So is the question how many FTEs are funded from the general fund for the police and fire departments? Is that your question? Or what is funded on the general fund side for police and fire? Is that your question? I'm asking.
She's asking
Yeah.
you.
Oh, Well, I guess my question was, is because I would truly like to be able to see. I mean, I know we talked about it last week. He's fine with how many staff he has, but I would truly like to see more positions created because they all work so hard here. You know, this is a very, very busy city. So I'm just wondering, you know, I was just trying to get a better understanding why Measure U is basically funding all the positions, and we've only increased, what, 3 since 2016 is what the numbers I think we came up with last week. You know, how all that money, how that got shifted. Now, I appreciate what you said about, you know, the city. I mean, I'm just trying to grapple with the numbers, I guess, and why we're paying for so many staff out of MU.
I'm not going to, from what I gather, what a previous management employee in the police department stated was that, and Chief, maybe you can shed some light on this, was that when Measure U was created, a lot of positions were initially funded by Measure U in order to show that there were positions that were being, or that there was funds being expended. And so what ended up happening was that there was a shift from the funding of personnel from the Measure U to the general fund in order to show that personnel was actually being expended against Measure U. Now, what that resulted in is general fund vacancies. So when we talk about positions that are being added to the budget, I would ask the question, and maybe the chief has this information off the top of his head, I don't know if he does, but where are the vacancies in? Are they in the general fund or are they in Measure U? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't matter of where the position is funded. I think the concern is how many net positions have you added? Because I think that's really the opportunity that was afforded by Measure U. So even if the chief were to say, well, we've increased our officers by 5 or 6 positions, and if I told you, well, those positions are in the general fund, I'd be curious to hear what the response would be from the committee. So Chief, do you have that off the top of your head where those vacancies are funded out of, Measure U or the general fund?
I think some of the vacancies that we currently have are in the general fund, but we do have a couple vacancies, and I could give the exact number when I go back to my shop of what those vacancies. I think we have a couple of Measure U and the rest are in general fund. So as I said that we're at 72, we're authorized 78. So out of the 78, I think I have 2 that are Measure U and 4 that are general fund. And as revenues increase and the discussions are, are made regarding the financial status of the city, as the budget increases, there's discussion talks about the general fund at 72% at higher revenues that are coming in, and also Measure U, but those are discussions during budget season. So I'd say that prior to me becoming chief, yes, those positions were filled, I think pushed over to the Measure U, as the city manager explained, but we're doing catch up all the time as well. We talk about 2021. I feel like that year is just because of the pandemic, really didn't have an opportunity to do anything or catch up on any positions as we're moving forward now. But hopefully that clarifies it. So, and those are beneficial for us to have those positions called Measure U and general fund, although they're all general fund monies, just so I know what I'm spending my money and how much I have in each budget every year for the fiscal year. It's more of a for internally for me to know how much money I have to spend or what I can spend or with personnel or equipment or operating expenses.
And I think I'm looking at them combined. I mean, if general fund was funding all these positions before MU ever even got voted in, and you should have all this extra money to be able to give these guys for their departments, then, but now we're eating it up with personnel. So yeah, I appreciate I can hear that things got transferred over. I don't know, I just like to see them be able to get more.
I would love to see, and the reality of it is as the chief mentioned, that the more officers that we add, it's not going to be on the Measure U side. They're going to be funded they're all funded out of the majority of them are funded out of the general fund. So it's good in the sense to talk about what opportunities been afforded by Measure U, but the reality of it is we're really talking about the city in general, because the 2 positions that are vacant that are funded by Measure U, yes, it'd be great to add those 2. However, it'd be even better to add those 4 that are in the general fund. So really what we're talking about is more of a comprehensive look at the police department, and not so much by saying, oh, well, you've got that Measure U officer, but it's really about the net officers that have been added. So that's really what we're talking about, kind of from a global perspective.
And also the 22-23 budget should be coming forward to this group in the next month or 2. So we may see additional requests for personnel from both police and fire, sworn in, or safety and non-safety.
So, and this is, I can understand why the decision was made to shift positions that were already here in terms of personnel that were already here at the city, and why they were chosen to be funded out of Measure U, because there was a desire to show that Measure U expenses were being utilized.
Yeah.
So think about this in a different sense. Let's assume that those positions had not, that they remained in the general fund. Well, your fund balance of Measure U would be even bigger because you wouldn't have any expenses against that. So the fact of the matter is, I can see why previous management decided to make that decision to illustrate that the expenses were getting charged against Measure U, but that resulted in lack of general fund positions on the police side that were actually boots on the ground, because now that funding has been shifted to Measure U. So really the positions were funded out of Measure U. At one time they were general fund, but now you've got these vacancies. So now all the hiring that's done is on the general fund side. Does that make sense?
Well, potatoes, potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. In the end, the problem is that the citizens were told that, you know, they were going to be able to increase their police department.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's not really happened. I mean, except by a few positions. So regardless of where the money's coming from, we haven't seen the increase to the citizen that, you know, they were told.
Yeah, and if I'm being brutally honest with you, I think they were also sold something that didn't reconcile with the city's budget. So if I'm being completely honest with the committee, I think that the reality of the matter should have been some really legitimate, tough discussions about why that measure was actually needed versus promises that didn't reconcile with the city's budget or its audited financial statements. That's the part that I see. It was before my time, but if, you know, one of the first things I did, I looked at the budgets and the audited statements and said, this is impossible. Fiscally, it's impossible because of that dilemma. So the same dilemma we talked about earlier, that the Oversight Committee now is tasked with those types of questions, it's right in your lap now, just as it's been right in my lap for the last, 5 years. So I'm happy to share in the lap having with everybody, because it's been the challenge that I've had to deal with straight on in my reality.
And that's the black eye that those of us that are going to put out there to pass Measure U again are up against. Because there's so many citizens out there that do realize, hey, we were sold something that not all the truths were given to us.
Government.
Yeah, but it's smoke and
That's
mirrors,
hard.
but it's
Yeah.
smoke and mirrors is what you're just saying. So you're trying to sell the residents on, look at what Measure U is spending their money on, is these 12 policemen, and we have to show that we're spending Measure U money on policemen when those 12 policemen, like she said, were already there. It's not any new policemen. So then you're saying, well, okay, but we're going to hire the new policemen on the general fund side, but we're showing them that, look, we're using the Measure U money. It makes no sense. It's just like Holly just said. If those 12 policemen were being paid out of the general fund, showing that it was being paid out of the general fund, then we would have more money in Measure U to then be able to show, look, we've hired more policemen with the Measure U money, or we've been able to buy them new cars or radios or whatever they need. You know, it's smoke and mirrors of just, you just said it yourself, that we had to show we were spending Measure U money, and so we're gonna tell them we're doing it on 12.
It was before my time. This was what was conveyed to me,
Right.
so I can't take the glorious credit for that. But that was what was conveyed to me. Now, on the flip side, let's say the next 4 officers that we hire are funded strictly out of Measure U. Well, now you've got a savings on the general fund side. So no matter which way you slice it, unless you're fully staffed with all of your positions, you're going to end up with a savings somewhere.
Yes.
Whether it's a general fund or Measure U, really, that's the fact of the matter. And I don't know that there's an easy solution to that question.
No, there isn't, but people aren't following the general fund. People, the residents are not following, but they're following Measure U. They're following it to the letter of where each nickel is going. So no matter if where you put that, like she said, when would you put those 12 policemen back into the general fund and show that we've hired? It's all again, it's showing that we're doing what we say we're going to do, which is what we're trying to do, but it's all in the perception. And that's a big thing, is people's perception. So whether you pull it out of general funds or you pull it out of Measure U, it's gotta come from Measure U, and it's gotta show that you're using Measure U now, not 5 years ago, not 3 years ago, but right now, because it is gonna come up really quick to be revoted on. And so people are going to remember what's fresh in their head. They're not going to remember when we first started and that we didn't have the money, and so we had to pull out a Measure U to balance the budget. People aren't going to remember that, but they're going to remember how many policemen you hired and what you did for the fire department. So
I think what will happen is they'll tell the public, we're losing 19 policemen and 23 fire.
Yes.
yeah,
And
that's
so
probably
you better
well.
re-vote it back in, or else you're gonna lose all those positions. So it's very
Yeah.
clever.
You know, the fact of the matter is, I'll just ask this question so that I'm not saying it, but I think it's a great question to ask. So Chief Poost, what happens if Measure U goes away? How many positions are you talking on your side?
We would have 59 positions on the general fund side.
59.
59.
So
But we
Chief,
started out with, in 2016, how many did we start it with?
which goes back to the fundamental issue
The
of
cost.
the city had an unbalanced budget.
Yes.
yeah,
That's the fundamental issue that every single time I come to the group, I have to go back to what was sold and the facts of the reality, which was not conveyed at all. So that to me is the biggest challenge here, was that something was promised that didn't reconcile with the budget. Now, I think in my view, the correct message would have been that Measure U would be utilized to stop the potential reduction of the officers that were in the police department at that moment in time. That's the only way you would have balanced the budget. Because the assumption was, maybe you have the answer for me. How do you solve that $5 million deficit, knowing that at that time, police and fire, and again, this is no disparagement against police and fire, they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But how do you take 75% of your budget and reduce $5 million of expenditures?
Wasn't that also about the time the city was seriously considering contracting out fire?
I would say it was around that time.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe you have the answer to that question, because I don't know how you pass a new sales tax measure, agree to the new expenditures, and then not deal with your general fund deficit. If someone has the answer to that, I'd love to talk to
You
you.
would hire it?
Yeah, I'd hire you in a heartbeat right now.
Well, I mean, I guess if I would have been involved, my recommendation was let Measure U pay that $5 million deficit and you start fresh. And now we have all this new money coming in to increase your Your,
But it's an ongoing deficit. It's not just a single year.
Right.
It's the fact that we were bringing in always 5 million less than we were spending. A checking account or a savings account can only do that for so long, and then it depletes. There's nothing left. And that's the direction that we were headed very fast.
And actually, as a side note to that, in 2020, because I know the committee will remember this, we had actually done a financial model for 5 years out. And we had illustrated that in just a few years, assuming that the city kept its same level of spending, it would have depleted all of its reserves in just a couple of years. So we were planning in 2020 to make some refinements with the budget that were going to be difficult. COVID just sped it up and made it that much faster.
What's the gas prices gonna do to the PD, especially?
gotta set aside some MU funds for those gases, those fire trucks need gas too.
The ding you guys heard just a little bit ago was my daughter telling me that she just paid over 6.5 for regular up and humble.
Pretty-
Okay, do we want to go back to questions 1 and 2? I think 1 and 2
wanted to, yeah.
go together and, well, we have a new 4, but do we have a motion that the audited expenditures were in line with the 2 resolutions and the ordinance? We all know 1918. And does the committee authorize the chair and the vice chair to prepare a letter of the findings to go to the city council?
I'll second.
Any roll call?
Motion by committee member Timmons and second by committee member Clark. Do roll call, committee member Darwin.
Wait, could we just add one thing? We've always attached a copy of this summary to the letter. I think it's called attachment A.
We can do that to the
Can we
letter.
modify? But, you know,
We'll
change.
correct it
Okay.
to the 2/3, yes.
Sorry.
Going through the roll call, committee member Darwin,
Yes.
committee member Clark,
Yes.
committee member Timmons,
Yes.
committee member Chanel,
Yes.
chairwoman Cosmo.
Yes.
That motion passes 5-0.
Okay, I only know part of the next question. So should we address
Oh,
that
let me-
first? Oh,
Let me bring it up, I'm sorry. Let me share my screen. So can you see that, or would you like me to read
I
it?
can't see it, but
Okay.
I know the first part, and the second part is the 188.
So the second question,
458.
the original operating transfer that was talked about, Measure U in support of police general fund. What we see here is that there was a savings, probably in the personnel line item. We probably had some vacancies that happened in Measure U that resulted in not needing the Measure U in support of general fund. That's what happens when you have a vacancy, you generate some savings. So what this says is that there was $320,000 that essentially went from Measure U into the general fund. So the question is, would the committee like to recommend that the council move that back, that 320,000 back into Measure U for Measure U fund balance?
So would the PD still get that? It would roll into their
The police.
next,
So it would be, if you look at the Measure U fund balance that Lorena talked about, that's included in the ACFR, their fund balance would grow by $320,000.
So they have 9,791,000 now. It would grow by 320.
So put them over 10 million?
so if they just have more money to spend,
They-
can they save?
That's correct.
I say, I make a motion on this for that.
And I second.
Very good.
Motion by committee member Timmons and second by committee member Chanel. Roll call, committee member Darwin,
Yes.
committee member Clark,
Yes.
committee member Timmons,
Yes.
committee member Chanel,
Yes.
chairwoman Cosmo.
Yeah.
That motion passes 5-0.
So now the third question is similar but different. The fire department had a budget that was adopted for Measure U. They exceeded the budget and the general fund picked up the difference. So the question for the committee is, does the committee wish to inform the council that Measure U should be deducted that amount because it was a general fund expense that was covered by, or it was a Measure U expense covered by the general fund? So does the committee want to weigh in on that to the council?
And
The
and
general fund should keep that.
the general
do
fund
too.
still would be at the 72% minimum.
Yeah, so
expenditure.
in a kind of a simplistic view, if it was 72% without the 188, including the 188 jumps the 72% to, let's just say for the sake of the conversation, 74%. So you're allocating more funding to public safety than was originally included in the budget. That's in a simplistic view, that's what that is.
I'm about balanced budgets and keeping within our, and now I'm not saying that they have any control or not control, or, I mean, I understand overtime, I understand, if that's where it came from. But I think the general fund could keep that up.
Do you have any more comments? I would just like to say in the past, and I think Dick Clark was with me too. The committee has talked about, sorry, chief, but overtime in the fire department. It has been an issue. I mean, they requested on 950,000 additional dollars like 2 years ago. So I don't know if there's if anyone else has any other comments about that, but I do understand fire. It's 24-hour shifts, so time and a half, that's 36 hours.
And I can tell you that we're trying our best right now to address that through recruitment, right? And then also retention. Unfortunately, I've lost a couple firefighters recently to fire departments for various reasons, right? But it's typically pay, salary, and working conditions. And so we're doing our best. We have an ongoing recruitment right now to shore some of those things up, which obviously reduce that when we have those positions filled.
Okay. Do you have any comments?
It's been covered, I think.
Do we have a motion? Do you need a motion?
I would prefer a motion so that it's incorporated within the letter.
Is there a motion?
So the motion would
yes
be,
or no,
yeah,
right?
yes or
I'm not
no.
motioning that one, but-
And I'll throw out what the example might be. A motion might be that the committee does not wish to have Measure U cover the excess that hit the general fund. That would be a motion from the committee that would be embedded in a commentary letter that we would provide to council. So not necessarily a motion to make the transfer from Measure U to general fund, but simply stating that the committee does not wish to make any transfer from the general fund or from Measure U to the general fund. So it's,
I would make that motion.
okay.
I'll second.
Motion by committee member Timmons, second by committee member Clark. Committee member Darren.
Before I say anything, so I just want to be clear on this. That 188 is staying in the general fund. It's not,
Well,
Measure U is not paying
Well,
for that.
The council may
the
make-
council
Yeah,
will
I
make
know,
that
but
decision.
I want.
But the recommendation and the
Yes, is
comment
that
from
it
the
stays there,
oversight,
yes.
that's correct.
Yes, so yes.
Committee member Clark,
Yes.
committee member Timmons.
Yes.
Committee member Chanel,
Yes.
Chairwoman Cosmo.
Yeah.
That motion passes 5-0.
And then the last question, Chair and Vice Chair, does the committee authorize the chair and the vice chair to sign the letter, including the items that were taken up today on behalf of the Measure U Oversight Committee?
We'll make a motion for that.
I second.
Motion by committee member Timmons, second by committee member Darren. Committee member Darren,
Yes.
committee member Clark,
Yes.
committee member Timmons.
Yes.
Committee member Chanel,
Yes.
Chairwoman Cosmo.
Yes.
That motion passes 5-0.
Are we ready to move on to number 9, future agenda items? Or am
I have
moving
nothing
too
else.
fast? Am I moving
I'm
too
exhausted
fast?
from talking.
Okay, so I guess we'll,
I do have one question.
Okay.
Did I hear right that we do, as of the next council meeting, we will have a signed MOU with the police department?
come on.
We are hopeful that the council will approve the MOU tomorrow.
Okay,
Okay.
so why did they go without a MOU for a whole year? I think that I can't publicly say my opinion on any city letting that happen, and I've been through it a number of times. Why did it happen here?
I think the process of negotiations usually takes time. And
So it
so,
wasn't started soon enough?
no, negotiations take time. And so what usually happens in the course of this MOU in particular, this will be retroed back to the start of this fiscal year. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. It will just be cleaned up when the agreement is signed upon by the council and be retroed back to the original expiration.
They'll get a nice big fat check.
The check
that's
doesn't matter.
Separate from their
It's-
pay, because I mean,
it's-
I see it.
As an officer,
Yeah.
when I was working without a contract, my council didn't care for me. They didn't have my back. And that's, I'll never forget that.
Hey, I can say that the councils work very diligently and very quickly to get this squared away. And I think that
If we
It's a-
can, if we
it's a
can balance
dance.
a budget, we should be able to sign MOUs at the very least at their sunset date.
yeah, I think part of that is, there was a lot of work that happened. I can tell you right now that HFFA will, require some more work on their agreement, their MOU. So if we look at it kind of in the context of everything, HPOA is getting kind of squared away first, and then HFFA, not to say that Chief Sell's representing them, but the fire department, they will need to be squared away next.
Well, I'm sure this lady would love not to have to go back and fix retro budgets, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do want to commend the council for their diligence in getting us to this finish line, as well as the HPOA as well. So I think collectively, everybody, got it done.
This is not a opinion that is new to me. This is an opinion that's been 25 years plus.
You sound like you've been in the business before.
I came within 2 days to being laid off because the only reason I wasn't is we had a detective who had the choice of coming in and working light duty because of a heart problem. And he called me up and said, I'm not taking the light duty because you've got a baby on the way. And I remember that to the day I die. So I really truly believe that no MOU should go past its sunset clause.
I also know that Chair Cosma has negotiated contracts all her
Yeah.
life. So is it normal to have that happen?
For me, it would be not normal to on the sunset date, no. I mean, there's so many different reasons, and you have to have your labor negotiators be available for your labor meetings, and it's just a lot going on, plus you've got to have your council meetings to get the authority.
Not being able to do anything in person made it that much more difficult.
Right,
And then membership voting,
yes, there's just so many steps. you
you
can
get certain
through.
agreements agreed upon while you're going through the whole negotiation process. So you have the MOU ready to go.
My
And that's a
last two
great point.
But
departments
retroactivity is good.
did
That's
interim
not- yeah.
agreements. In fact, Chris and I were just talking about that after our last meeting. That's what they had to do to be able to get
Yeah.
the sunset clause.
And that was a great point because, as you know, you're going to come to agreement on so many things, and usually the last couple of items are the ones that are kind of the items that last the longest. So we had a lot of good discussions with them, but there were just a couple items that needed some massaging, if you will.
Yeah, and neither side ever gets everything they want, but you want it to be win-win for both sides. That's the way that's my opinion.
And then you pick the items that you're gonna sunshine for the next
Right,
round.
and throw 'em off the last day.
So
Okay.
I know that this is not necessarily maybe an agenda item for next time, but I just have an ask that we could get the 222 pages prior, so like we were notified at 6 p.m. on Friday and it's Monday and I've worked.
Wait,
today.
what 220 pages?
Well, this, this was sent out, but it wasn't sent
So-
out till really late, and so it was just a
So-
lot of,
The ACFR was actually provided about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
About a
And that's
month ago.
included in the-
Yeah, so that's why it's so large. The ACFR is a large document. The AUP, that's how long, how many pages is that one?
Like 7
5
or 8.
pages. I
Yeah,
think.
that's what the new item was for today's meeting.
You might not have received it like I did, because I had to have JP actually send it to me during our last meeting, because I realized that I had never gotten it. So.
Oh, that's why I asked you. You said you hadn't.
Mhm.
okay,
Okay, so do we have any
all right.
future agenda items? I have a few I'd like to bring up. Well, I know at some point we'll be getting the next fiscal year budget. So I think that's one of our most important tasks is to review that. And then if we could get action plan updates from police and fire, because the information we received today actually is like 8 months old. So if we could get, what your plans are for the next fiscal year.
And this is a question for the committee. Does the committee prefer morning, evening meetings? What's best for the committee? Evening,
I work.
evening.
Work.
Okay.
Okay. We used to always meet at 1, but I know that's not possible now. So.
Sounds like evenings are preferred. And just so that everybody knows, all departments and divisions are currently working on their budgets right now. And so we do expect that over the next couple of months, we'll build more momentum to be able to bring them to the Oversight Committee to review and comment. So we'll do something very similar where we ask the committee, are the proposed expenditures, and both chiefs will go over every single expenditure that they have and ask the committee to weigh in on whether the proposed expenditures are in line with the same resolutions and ordinance. So this one was a little bit unique because the committee was appointed in 2021. And so you didn't have the privilege of having the conversation of seeing the proposed and the actual write-up of the actual expenditures. But with that being said, I do believe that when you look at the 22-23 expenditures, you will be around to see the actual review of the actual audit. So you can see the beginning as well as the end. So it becomes a little bit more fluid in being able to look at the expenditure, the proposed, and then look at the actual final. A little bit easier.
So about that, because, I struggled a little bit last week. I know everybody entertained the fact that I was, we had some conversation and I really appreciate that. But in the long run, the way the question is phrased to us is a yes and no question. So that to me doesn't give us, it says review and advise. Our role is to review and advise. So we would advise on certain matters is the way I read it, but the way the question is posed is generally, is it a part of the resolution, yes or no?
And
So-
the reason for that is because the committee needs to comment on whether they are in line or not. That's why it's phrased that way. Now, when it comes to other things, like for instance, I'll give you an example that the committee had weighed in on previously. Has nothing to do with resolutions 19 or ordinance 1908, or 4731 or 4703. And the chair and the vice chair will remember this. Whether a fire engine apparatus should be financed or not financed. Not in anywhere of the resolutions or the ordinances, but it's something that the Oversight Committee can provide commentary on. So the opportunity that the committee will have when they review the budget or proposed expenditures are definitely things that will be afforded to the Oversight Committee. It's just when it comes to the specific letter that is provided to the council, that's why it's written that way. But there are other times where the committee will be able to just provide commentary that isn't necessarily related to a yes or no. But for the sake of the letter that gets provided to the council, it's a clear determination that the committee needs to come to. That's why it's phrased that way.
So I guess I'm wondering why then the MU committee last week wasn't allowed to even though we discussed it, we didn't have a chance to advise on our thoughts of what should have happened.
So specifically related to the expenditures of the MOU, if the committee had additional feedback on whatever those items were, that's where it gets incorporated within a motion. So the motion of the committee or a committee member becomes, and I'll throw something out there, you know, we agree that the proposed expenditures are in line with resolutions 1918, resolution 4731 and 4703. And I would like to also make a note that we prefer that they don't get spent on wages or benefits or deferred compensation. That's how that gets captured within a letter from the Oversight Committee to the council. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it didn't feel like to me that we had that opportunity to provide that feedback. It was a yes or no question.
So similar to what either gets discussed or doesn't get discussed, what I'm looking for and what the council was looking for is, are the expenditures in line, yes or no? Additional commentary can be made, assuming that there's a second in addition to that from the committee. Now, that's just how a committee, a council operates. I think as time goes on, there will be additional opportunities for or a committee member can say, well, I would really like to add that to my motion. And that's just probably getting accustomed to how the committee works, and a council, you know, essentially is able to communicate their message. For the sake of what I was looking for, I just needed a yes or no with respect to the expenditures, because that's what the committee is there for. But other motions, other commentary, purely up to what the committee would like to do.
We've done that a number of times, and that example on the fire department was a really good one. We've added a lot before to those letters.
Yeah.
And so it would be probably good to review the previous Measure U Oversight Committee agendas and see what's been captured in the sake of those conversations. Because the only thing that we do is we take the input that's provided in a formal action. That's why we ask for those formal actions. We provide it in the context of a letter. And just like we did last week, we'll share it with the chair and the vice chair and say, does this embody on behalf of the Oversight Committee what the actions were and the motions made? So that's why it's really important to be very specific on those motions.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn, or is there more comments from anyone?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. We don't really need roll call, do we?
Yeah, as long as there's
Just say yes.
consensus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your stuff.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.